do we have anybody online who has not been at one of our first two meetings to just quickly introduce themselves? Look, I see, actually, we have presenters online. Not seeing any. All right. So, Emily, if you could give me the next slide. I'm just gonna, again.
So sorry, guys. I appreciate everybody's patience.
So just to remind folks, over the course of the next few months, we're still looking to find consensus on the current, on how to improve the current development review process. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm Fred Mejias. I'm with WSSC. I'm the development section manager.
Great to have you. Thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
Have I missed anyone else? All right. Still having trouble sharing slides?
Yeah, we still,
Okay. So, so again, trying to find ways to improve the current, on the current development review process. This process will end by early October, at which point we're going to be delivering some recommendations to, at the state level, to Delegate Lopez and her committee, as well as items that apply at the county level to county executive, planning board, county council. We agreed on a set of ground rules for our deliberations. Hey, look, the slides are up. Yay, thanks, Emily. So yeah, just advance one more. All right, so here were the things that we agreed upon. So I know that a lot of the issues, or at least some of the issues that we're going to be getting into today and in future meetings, have a history to them, can be contentious. So mainly just wanting to focus on ground rules for our conversation. We talked about these last time. Listen with intentionality and goodwill, be respectful of all viewpoints, speak from your interest and your stake, but keep the benefit of the whole in mind. Help me keep things focused, keep us clear on what we need to do to move towards agreement on certain things, and let's create a supportive environment for honest, straightforward conversations. All right, next slide. Just a reminder, so we have 3 more of these meetings on the books. One of our jobs over the next week is to really figure out, because we know we're not going to be done by August 24th. We're definitely going to have 2, maybe 3 meetings in September, again, because that's when our deadline's coming up. We're going to try and get those dates on the books in the next week or so, so you have plenty of advance notice. Hello, Delegate. And so, yeah, just pay attention to your emails very quickly. Next slide, next 2 public meetings, July 18th and August 2nd. We continue to see public comments trickle in, so we'll continue to share them. I think between last meeting and this meeting, we've had 1. I'm not sure that got circulated out to everybody. I just saw it for the first time yesterday, but we'll keep everybody in the loop on what we're hearing and from whom. Next slide. So 2 things that we talked about by the end of last meeting was that although the letter of intent talked about kind of the core development review process, based on the first 2 sets of conversations we had in June, we're in agreement that we want to be looking at the whole process from pre-application to, I don't know if it's all the way to shovels in the ground, but to the end of permitting, to be looking for numerous junctures where we might be able to improve things. There's a preference from the group to receive written materials ahead of time. I hope you were all staying up late, like to midnight last night, to read through all 13 or however many documents. Apologize for the delays. We had a tough time because of the holidays and then holiday schedules after the holidays to get squared away on a bunch of things. By next meeting, you will have far more, at least 2 or 3 days in advance of seeing materials, and so that you have proper time to prepare. So I apologize for the delays on getting that to you. I'm sure you really haven't had a chance to digest much of anything. A lot of what we did send is going to be presented today, so you'll have a chance to interact with the presenters, and obviously you'll have time after the meeting to digest materials more fully. Next slide. Just a few things we said at the end of the meeting. I had asked what are things we need to make sure that we tackle in the future, not necessarily this meeting, but in future work group meetings. So needing to get clear on where the common delays and common pain points are, need to revisit the lead agency memo. We'll be doing, at least addressing some of both of those first ones today. Potentially looking for benchmarks that we can benchmark outside, but making sure that we're doing apples to apples comparisons, since the way our governance structure works, it's different from a lot of planning agencies. How we should integrate and synchronize parts of the process and platforms, identify the critical path, especially as we're thinking about how we're going to share with folks at the end of this who know a lot less about development review, if not nothing, how they can really understand what this is and how it works. Because right now, as an outsider, it's pretty difficult to kind of follow, right? And then there was a specific thing about just understanding a little better in a presentation that was done near the end of session 2 on the fact that in the administrative process, the average is 77 days, which is well over kind of the stated timeline, and understanding that. So understanding that, understanding other delays. So obviously we're not going to get to all this today, but we're going to be tackling at least some of the first 2 things, and we're going to continue moving through this in subsequent meetings. I think that's my last. Okay, and so the primary focus of this meeting is to take a closer look at the Department of Permitting Services process. We got kind of a taste of that last time, but we're going to go into much more detail, understanding the roles of DOT and some of their data analysis, understanding some of the roles and experience of Department of Environmental Protection, beginning to look at the lead agency process, how it works, and how it can work better. So that's our primary focus for today. I'm sorry, one more slide. And so our agenda is we're going to be hearing presentations and having discussions from DOT perspective, DPS perspective. I'm going to move the lead agency memo discussion up, I think, before the break, because one of the things I want to make sure is we hear from the developers and their experience of it. And I know, Gary, that you've got to leave by around noon. So I'm going to do my best to kind of get you in that conversation before you have to leave. And then if we have time, would love to hear folks' ideas about, based on everything you've heard so far in the first 3 meetings, are there things that have gotten clearer for you about how we improve timeliness? And with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to ask Delegate Lopez to say a few welcome words. Good to have you back.
Sure, thank you. Yes, and I appreciate everyone's continued participation as the work group continues to turn out some good stuff. I've heard great feedback from been watching this process and just seeing how collaborative and open it's being. And so I just want to say keep up and, consider me a resource as we go through things. I'm in the process of talking to our local delegation chair about, what next steps might look like. And those are ongoing conversations. So that's what's going on my end. And I'm just excited that this group is still being productive and moving.
Great. Thanks, Delegate Lopez. All right, so we're going to start with the first presentation, which is Tim. And just, if you've already got it up, why don't you share, if you're able to share, Tim, and that might save us a little bit of time having it come from your screen. And this is one of the handouts that got sent out late last night. So take it away, Tim.
All right. So first, I think folks, I think just give a broad overview of DOT and what we do, and then I'll kind of recap a little bit about what we said at the last meeting, how we get plugged into the DRC process, and then I'll go into some of the data that tracks like DOT's performance, and then I want to put forth, a scheme for process improvement that I think would be helpful to us to kind of guide our collective efforts as we kind of look for where is it best for us to focus in on in the limited time that we have. So first of all, DOT is a large agency. Our mission is to keep people moving, and we need to keep people moving regardless of which mode they choose, whether they choose, we like to say, whether they walk, bike, drive, ride, roll, however they're choosing to move, whatever mode that is. We're here to help them do that because that's key to our economy. It's key to getting access to jobs, quality of life, the whole 9 yards. And so some of the things we do, there's 1,000 miles of arterials. Those are like your main roads. Almost 1,100 miles of that we're responsible for maintaining. But over 5,000 lane miles of road. So that's all of your neighborhood streets, the alleys, the public way, the ones that the developers build and then hand over to us. We're the ones that ultimately own that asset and are responsible for its maintenance and upkeep for its entire service life. We have over 500 bridges in the county that we maintain, and a good number also are constructed by developers as part of their work, and then we come in and accept those for maintenance, and then we're responsible for inspecting them on a regular basis, keeping them up in a state of good repair. There are a lot of federal regulations that govern this that we need to make sure we're complying with. We run Ride-On. It's after WMATA, it's the busiest transit system in the area. It's second largest in the region, second largest in the state. This is, I guess, pre-COVID numbers, but 71,000 passengers a day that we're picking up and helping them get to their destination, and over 16 million riders each year. So it's a key component of keeping folks moving. And when we talk about transit-oriented development, we get involved in the coordination of the services we provide with the kinds of development that is occurring in the county. We have 860 traffic signals. We manage them not only for the county, but for the state as well within the county. We have parking is a big component of economic development, and frequently a topic of discussion with especially development in our urban districts. And we have 22,000 county parking spaces that we manage. Having the right mix of parking, not too little and not too much, is critical for transit-oriented development. And I talked about walking, biking, and rolling. We've got 1,600 miles of sidewalk. We illuminate our right-of-way with 67,000 streetlights, and we got over 100 miles of bike lane, and we're adding more each year. The sidewalk, we're putting down around 5 miles of sidewalk every year to fill in gaps and connect things, as development occurs. So that's just a little bit about DOT, and you can kind of see, as the ultimate owner of all these assets and the one who is, responsible under our county code for ensuring all of these things are designed and constructed to standards, that's a big component of why we get involved in the development process. And so we have some priority areas. One, safety is always number one, so Vision Zero. So, we have a goal to, by the end of 2030, eliminate serious and fatal collisions in the county, and both planning and DOT have kind of bought into this, and we're working arm in arm to achieve our Vision Zero goals. Montgomery County has a climate action plan, and when we talk about serving all modes, we're talking about, even with our transit, eliminating our emissions and transitioning to a clean fleet. And so we want to eliminate all of our transportation emissions by 2035. Along with that, we need to find ways of more efficiently moving people so that they have choices. They don't have to rely on a gasoline powered or internal combustion engine on a single occupancy vehicle. And then the other part of it is to, be good for business in the county, right? Economic growth and development, is critical to the county, and transportation, having good access to jobs, to affordable places to live, that's critical to our economic development goals. So those are our priority areas. And so I forgot we had some animations in here, so we'll skip through those. And so, we're organized in a director's office. A lot of our development, well, all of our development review staff, we have a staff of 4 that get engaged with the DRC process. They all sit in our director's office, and that's an indicator of how critically important it is, to ensure things development is kind of moving smoothly through our review processes, and also because when I go to these other divisions, you'll see we're touching a lot of our operating divisions when we are looking at reviewing a set of plans and making sure that we're meeting the county code, that we're meeting the design standards, and that we're going to get an asset that's going to be safe and kind of the service life that we expect at the end of the day. So we have Division of Highway Services. They're the folks that maintain all of this infrastructure on a regular basis. They remove the snow, they patch the potholes, they trim the trees that are infringing upon the right-of-way, those kind of things. We have the Division of Parking Management. They're the lead for all of those 22,000 parking spaces we talked about. Traffic engineering, they run all of the traffic signals. They're responsible for the day-to-day operation of our transportation network. The emergency coordinating the emergency response when there's a crash. That's what our Division of Traffic Engineering does, and they get tied into development review frequently because they have the expertise to review the traffic studies that the developers are submitting. And so our director's office staff is coordinating frequently with the Division of Traffic Engineering. We have a Division of Transportation Engineering. What's the difference between the two? Well, the traffic is more on the day-to-day operations. Transportation Engineering is the design and construction arm of DOT. So all of the county-funded projects we implement there, and they're also the keeper of our standards, right? There's the road code that says we need to have, certain, lane widths, certain type of concrete, certain type of asphalt. That this is where the engineering expertise is to kind of take all of the code requirements and keep our standards up to date. And then we have Division of Transit Services that's responsible for operating ride-on, Flash, bus rapid transit, Flex, our micro transit. And so that's our day-to-day folks who operate the transit. So out of these the development review process, probably traffic engineering, transportation engineering are getting involved most frequently in the development review process, either because there's operation impacts associated with development, or there's a coordination between a developer project and a county CIP project that we need to work out, or because there's sometimes folks want to deviate a little bit from the standards and they're asking for permission. And so the Division of Transportation Engineering, that's where the expertise is to evaluate the impacts of those. Just give you a little $255 million operating budget. I think I was going to delete these slides, not that important, but over 1,200 full-time positions. And then the capital program, it's 131 projects in the 6-year CIP with $4.4 billion. So we're doing a lot of work, and at the same time we're coordinating with the development review process. So we have a lot of balls to juggle, but we try and make sure that that core group within our director's office is holding people to task and making sure that the development review process is moving forward. Let's see. So just kind of recap. Again, these are on the right-hand side. This is going to look familiar. This is the process that Robert presented last time. We get involved primarily through the DRC process and most frequently at the preliminary plan stage. Although there are other times where we get called in, but most frequently, that's when DOT is first getting involved in the process. So the way that works, that's a 2-week system. DOT gets
the plans. We get access and e-plans on a Monday, meeting internally with other county agencies, DEP, DPS. We're meeting with them that Thursday, so 4 days later. We're holding a pre-DRC meeting on the second Monday. We're uploading our comments to DRC on a Thursday, and we're completing our review in 2 weeks. That's the idealized process. Right? We'll talk a little bit. I've got some data to see how we're doing there, but that's the way it's supposed to work. And things we're looking for, safety, site distance is a big component of it. Developers are frequently bringing in new entrances into the right of way, and we need to make sure that, a vehicle that's entering or exiting can see pedestrians, can see oncoming traffic so that those turning movements can be made safely. And then storm drain is the other big thing that we're looking for. We want to make sure, everybody's got runoff. We all got water. We have to share and make sure that it goes where we want it and not where we don't. That's kind of the definition of a flood, right? Any water where you don't want it. And so storm drain, the engineering folks are also the keepers of the storm drain criteria. And so we're making sure that we're meeting DOT's storm drain standards, which is a little bit different from what DPS is doing. They have a component of that, but they're a little bit broader when it comes to stormwater management. Storm drain is conveyance. Stormwater management is about cleaning up any kind of sediment or oil or whatever that might get into the water. After we have the DRC meeting, we may not achieve consensus within that 2 weeks. So in between that 2-week process and the planning board meeting, we're going to continue to meet. If we don't have consensus, we're going to continue meeting with our partners in planning. We're going to continue to meet with the developer. We're going to negotiate. We're going to try and achieve a consensus, and then we're going to issue our approval letter, right? That's got to go into planning's packet. And I believe that the deadline's 10 days, well, at least 10 days so you can post it before the planning board hearing. Then we get to the planning board hearing decision. If we need to attend to testify, we do. Oftentimes we don't, because we've kind of successfully resolved all the issues prior to the planning board hearing. And then sometimes we get involved in the permitting process later on, and this is when it kind of shifts to where DPS is more the lead. If there's some unusual circumstances, when DPS was created, DOT positions and technical expertise moved to DPS specifically for the purpose of the permitting review process. And so it's only in unusual circumstances that DPS will be seeking DOT input, or if there's any kind of unresolved issues that even remain after the planning board before the permit can be issued, then we're kind of getting involved in those discussions at that point. So that's our role in the process. So that's kind of a recap of what we presented before. And so what we're looking for, one, we are responsible for Chapter 49 of the county code. That's what we call the road code. That's our complete streets design guide that we worked hard with planning to kind of update and modernize. So one, we want to make sure that any work that the developer is doing is complying with Chapter 49. Two, we want to make sure any storm drain work is complying with the county storm drain criteria. So if the developer's private system ultimately taps into the public system at some point, we want to make sure they're not overloading it and causing a problem downstream before we get to a natural drainage course and have an outfall. We're looking for operations. We want to make sure that the development does not adversely impact, I said traffic operations here, but transit operations, any kind of operations. We're making sure that the development doesn't adversely impact that. Or if it does, that the developer is doing something to mitigate those impacts so that we're not causing a problem for the rest of the public. And again, I'm sure public safety site distance is a key component of that, making sure that we're meeting the target speeds with the road design. Those are things that are all key to achieving our Vision Zero goals. So how well do we do at that review process? And so, our average time is 12 days. Just looking at the average is not looking at the complete picture. An average, and I'm sure some of you may be seeing this chart and having flashbacks to high school statistics and going, oh no, what did I get myself into? I'm a geek. This is the kind of stuff that I like, because it gives you some meaningful insights. So if you just look at an average, that's a measure of what's, central tendency. And so, average, a big chunk of it's going to exceed the average, a big chunk of it's going to be under the average. And so what I did, this is, as a histogram, little recap, you kind of group your review times into buckets. And so I've got these buckets, each bar is a 1 week span. And so what you see is, from 0 to 7. So we're getting, we went back to DOTs. We have an internal spreadsheet that frankly, I didn't know existed. And I'm glad that we had some dutiful engineers. You tell them to do something once and they keep doing it forever. They started doing this in 2016. This data is up through 2022. We have 2023, but we haven't closed out that spreadsheet yet, so I didn't include it. But so this is 6 years worth of data. We had 734, and that data goes over all types of reviews that our development review team is doing. Because we focus on preliminary plan, I just simplified it for this discussion to look at the preliminary plan review times. And so there were 734 applications that came in over the 6 years that our folks were involved in reviewing a preliminary plan. And what you see, there's a performance target here, right? We're supposed to get our comments in 2 weeks, right? And so I've got that performance target shown there, with the vertical line. There's some data issues. We have some that are less than 0. I didn't clean the data yet. I just, what that is somebody didn't enter a date at some point in those records. So we have a negative number of days when you do the calculations. So I got to figure out what's going on there. And some of those could potentially still be active. But it's a question. When you won't know to look at those things until you graph the data this way. So that's something we might want to look at. Why do we have negative number of days in our review time data? So, we're seeing, between 150 to 200, maybe 175 are wrapping things up within a week. I would surmise those are probably, single lot or something simple that you get to the pre-DRC. There's really not a lot to discuss. It's a simple, development. The biggest one, you can see the impact of the deadline because this wave is like bumping up against the deadline. And that's this distribution, this bell curve is skewed a little bit by the deadline. But you can see that the deadline does have its impact, and most of them are completing. 81% are being completed within 2 weeks. But that means 19% are not being complete in the deadline. And so I have to be honest, I have to take a hard look at what the data is showing to us. And to me, we ought to be looking at, okay, things that are exceeding the deadline, why and what's happening. And this data is from the date DOT gets access in E-plans to the date that we transmit our letter to the planning board. And so I said, okay, there's a 120-day deadline for the planning board. And, that means we got to get a letter, absolute drop dead date to the planning board, 110 days. So how many are being completed within 110 days? 99%. So you can kind of see what's probably happening here is the stickier things where we're not getting consensus. We're continuing to work on it together. And then right before the deadline, well, maybe not right, because you see it's happened. Sometimes we're able to solve it in week 3. Sometimes we're able to solve it in week 4, sometimes in week 5. But 99% of the time, we're solving it by the time the planning, we've worked together and we've come to a consensus by the time the planning board has to post something on the website so that they can have the meeting occur.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
So this is coming from someone's spreadsheet that they're just keeping internally.
Yeah, if you remember Greg Leck, engineer's engineer, he's,
That'll be great, still keeping the spreadsheet.
he started this in 2016, you know, and its purpose was initially to go into some of the county stat stuff. And then I think what happened is then we switched to tracking everything in E-plans. But the dutiful engineers kept entering their data into the spreadsheet. So, and I didn't know that was going on. But it was good that we had it, because you need that data to kind of hone in on where problems might be.
Yeah, and then days from DOT receipt, you're saying, what is that date again?
So that's the date that it gets posted to us in E-plans. So like that's that first Monday in the DRC process.
And then you're saying that your letter sent, that's the approval letter?
That is the approval letter getting sent to planning. And then
I don't know that I've ever received an approval letter from DOT in 14 days, so that the review time is 120. So we need your approval letter 45 days from the planning board hearing. That's like well into the 120 day
So
review.
then we ought to take a look at, instead of percent complete in 110, we ought to be looking at percent complete in 45 and seeing where
But
what
again,
percentage
that's
there's there.
45 days from the
Yeah,
public
date of the
hearing, but
public
that's
hearing,
like 3/4 of the
yeah.
way through the 120 day.
100.
It should be around like day 90-ish.
Okay, well,
You said day 90, Patrick?
Yeah, 89, depending on if they're on the 120 day, how,
so
it'll be 45 days ahead of that 120 day target. But with the review cycles and the way it works, I don't know that I've ever received a DOT approval letter 14 days from when they first got plan assigned. I'm not.
So we got to look at the data, and this group needs to follow the data. And so certainly I like your suggestion. Let's look and see.
And that may just mean something else.
Yeah.
Like day that DOT receives it, it may be a different target, like the final submittal, and then, which again is like I'll keep saying 80, 90, 85, whatever that is, then maybe from that point,
Okay.
this is more applicable, but I can't imagine you're assigning an approval letter at the same day as our DRC date is occurring. That just doesn't sound right to me.
So let's,
But aren't these review and not the approval? The point is the time that it takes to get DOT comments back on a plan that is initially submitted to it. So are you getting the comments back to the planning board timely versus the sign-off letter? Those are two different things.
so it's a good
Agreed.
question.
That would be two different things for sure.
But, you know, I think Patrick is raising a good point. I think this is why it's important to put the data up this way.
Yeah.
Because it prompts thinking and it prompts questions. And then you
Yeah,
can,
Those are
zoom
definitely
in.
two different questions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand which question.
But I
This
believe
data
you're
is
talking
answering.
about the DRC, you are getting them to the DRC, the way you were saying, we are on a 2-week rotation, we meet, and then, the Thursday, and then the following.
so I've got to look
I
at,
think you're talking about when it goes to the planning board.
so
And if we're saying, assuming I'm following Diane's question, I can't imagine that's what this is actually representing, because then we're suggesting that you provide your first round of comments within 110 days in some cases, like that just can't be accurate. So I don't.
And just a point of clarification,
Would-
the 110 days, if you're looking at the 120-day cycle,
yeah,
Tim,
that's good.
that's
I
when
know
the
exactly
actual
what that-
report gets
Yeah,
posted.
Yeah,
So
we need it sooner than that.
the
It's hard to tell. what we're
recommendations or
actually
the
recommending.
letters actually are received
Well,
much further in
what-
advance of that.
What we're representing, at least what I believe we were representing, and I think you guys are asking good questions that got to look at the data to make sure, because I believe we need to follow data. DOT, it's not from the date that the applicant has entered the E-plan cycle, right? Because that's an acceptance date. It's from the date that DOT is given access to those plans. So you raise an excellent point. Probably should not look at the 110 day to see what, what's going on. We need to come up with what's the number of days that, to your point, is it 45 days? And then you've already used some of those days in advance before we even get it. So yeah, I agree. We should take a look at a metric and see when does this fall into the overall development process. All excellent points.
And the 45 days is in the zoning ordinance. So that's a critical point, I think, in terms of
45 days before planning board?
before planning board, yes.
And was Greg here when we switched over to like the new timelines and that? I mean, he's been gone for a long time.
He has
I mean,
been
if you
gone.
guys that are entering data into a spreadsheet, like we don't, it'd be hard to understand what they're even tracking.
Sure. Well, we've got share the spreadsheet. We'll show you what the data, it's got all these columns and, it has, the dates, it's broken out by fiscal year, review type,
Okay.
all that kind of stuff. But I think my point about the methodology is valid in that these questions, if I just came in here and said, our average review time is 12 days, our target is 14, we wouldn't know as a group to ask the kinds of questions you guys are asking right now. So,
Well, yeah, but each task that you have, like getting to the DRC, getting to the 45 days, they all come with a task in e-plans. So that's an email that goes out to the various groups. So they absolutely know what their requirement is in terms of the data.
and so what would be awesome, I think, because you guys have your data up on the website, you can download the data. But some of that data, I don't know that it tracks some of those, it doesn't have on the public side, some of those internal milestones. I'm not sure. I don't think that it does. It posts that internal milestones, like we sent this to DOT on such and such date in the downloadable data. But if you guys have it, I mean, that would be, the data is king, right? That would be good to see.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a quick question. So how long from application to accepted does it get released on e-plans to the agency? Is that the 45 days you mean, or?
You mean before it goes to DRC?
Yeah.
No, the 45 days is basically from the planning board date. So,
Oh, you're going backwards from
yeah,
there.
you go backwards
Okay.
from the planning board date.
Per the
So-
code, we're supposed to get the letter 45 days prior to the public hearing.
Okay,
with the
so I
planning
guess
board.
my question is, so if you're starting at DOT receipt, how far is that from date application was accepted on the planning? Is it immediate?
It's immediate.
Everybody
Okay.
gets it.
Everyone
It's-
gets it.
E-plan
Like as
sends it
soon
out
as
to
it's,
everyone.
as soon as the application is accepted?
It's an
released?
email blast that goes
reviewers.
out with the new task.
The agencies, everyone gets it at the same time.
So then that's a good clarifying question. So what we might want to look at zeroing in, if the date that DOT gets it is also the date that planning has accepted it, then 45 days, well, it would be 120 minus 45. So that's, yes, that's 75 days. That DOT is delaying the process. We become the critical path. Our target, I agree, our target should be well in advance of that, but DOT is delaying things for any of these that are taking more than 45 days.
This is the 75-day mark, basically?
Yes.
So I have a question for Park and Planning. You have all of this in ePlan, so you know what your date of acceptance is of an application. Can't you print a report on the participating agencies' comments when they get the notice versus when the comments are received for DRC from the project doc, so that we can at least look and see, is there a problem? What's actually happening? Because that will tell us, I think, very specifically what's happening.
Absolutely, Diane. I mean, we get it. Everyone that's in the agencies get that information in terms of when it's accepted. And I think a point of clarification, when it's accepted, it gets assigned to whomever is listed as like the chief or the supervisor so that they can assign it to their reviewers.
So
Yeah, but just a point of clarification though, we heard Christina say that I mean, DOT regularly gets their information to us, I think, as do most agencies to get to DRC. It's the timeline to get it to the board for final recommendations, which I think goes to your point as to two different issues being discussed here, in terms of timing.
So it would be helpful though, and when I say can we see it, I'm talking about the work group. So if we can have the analytics on that process which we've got some of it, I think, in what you provided to us from before, but okay, when is an application received versus when is it accepted? And then once it's accepted, what is the timeline for what's happening from there to the date that is required for planning board hearing and those steps in the process? Can we see, so because that I think will help us to see in part where maybe if there are hangups or if where they might be.
So Diane, I want to make sure that I'm following you. So you're talking about analytics between when an application is received, when it's accepted, and then when it's accepted to when the planning board holds their hearing? Are those the two analytics you're looking for?
Well, and because we're looking at this sort of soup to, what is it, soup to nuts, or however you say it, as I heard it, start to finish, concept to occupancy is what that was what the last streamlining effort addressed, was concept to occupancy. So if that's what the group has agreed to take on now, it would be helpful to see, and Project Docs has this, so you can actually see the flow of a project. And so, like, for example, I'm thinking about a project that I'd like to just, we can understand and look at some of these. We see a lot of numbers that show that there's compliance, but then we also see numbers that might suggest that there's some hangups, and just to try to understand it. That's what we're trying, let's understand whether it's 7,000 Wisconsin Avenue, if it took 336 days for approval, that's from the numbers from, I think that we saw last time, or the model that we saw. What happened there? Where is there a problem that is occurring in that process? We don't want to be solutions in search of a problem. We want to understand if there are problems that we actually need to solve.
Thank you.
So, go ahead.
I just want to say, from an applicant standpoint, I think what we see is you have the same players that show up to every DRC consistently with comments, with letters, in a timely manner. I think there are some agencies that may have a different review timing cycle or things like that internally that may not provide comments at DRC. And there, it's a pretty regular, and I'm not going to name names, but it's a pretty regular contingency of people that don't show up for one reason or another. But folks like DOT is always pretty consistent in providing timely feedback in the DRC process.
And Kate, I want to make sure that I'm understanding. So you're saying that some agencies have a different time period that they're working within in order to provide feedback. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Are they from executive side?
For example, some some state agencies, for example, might have a different review time frame. And that may have.
Because as far as I understood that when Robert did.
No, I just want to make sure.
Keep County stormwater. You often won't have comments from stormwater based on their 30-day review time frame, depending on when you got the concept in and how your DRC data lines. So there is an instance where in a county agency setting that you may not have those comments at that time. Not,
Because it's under review.
right.
How does SHA play into this when projects include state roads? Is that a good
That-
segue?
That's probably
I'll
what
say
Pete
it.
is alluding to. But so all of the kinds of reviews that DOT is doing when we're on a county road, the state is going to do those same kind of reviews for access to a state road. And ultimately, you have to go through an access permit process to get that new entrance for that development, the authorization to construct that within the state right away. So
I don't believe, and this, Robert, you guys may be better positioned to answer this. We send the stuff to them, but they're following their access management process, and they're not necessarily bought into the DRC process. Is that a fair statement?
Not entirely. I mean, they're brought into the DRC process. I think in terms of when they get a traffic study, that really is dependent on how quickly a scoping study is done, which I brought up, I think, in our presentation, that we try to get that done early so that the timeline for review and that review, that TIS, I'm looking maybe at Carrie and Patrick, but I think that is sent out by us and it's sent over to you. It's sent to SHA. And the difference in timing for review is DOT has a 30-day time period to review those. SHA has a 45-day time frame. So when we say we try to get things done a little earlier to get them to get the reports out to them to review, so that by the time an application is submitted and gets to DRC, we have some pretty significant feedback on what improvements need to occur.
So when projects include both state roads and county roads, it's sort of, they're coming at it from almost two different directions.
Get lucky and you get an extra review or two different.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
knowing that,
Those happen,
knowing
they're
that,
concurrent though, right? Those, or can be.
Yeah, that's where we frequently step in to coordinate a meeting between SHA, DOT, and the applicant to try to make sure that everyone's in the room that needs to be. So we're not having one conversation, then another, trying to make that as efficient as possible when we know that there's an issue that we need to get together and resolve.
so
They do, I was gonna say, they do have a 45-day review because we'll only follow up on stuff. I was on the clock. You have your 45 days. Your DOT's 30 days.
Right.
So if we could push that.
Yeah.
Looking to the state here, if we could push that to line the 30 days up, that'd be helpful. It's a little thing, but it's.
That's big.
Still, it's 2 weeks. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
that could mean the difference between an extension or not in some cases. So
Yeah, and what it might help is, maybe that's a pipe dream, conflicting comments, which I think Gary would say is, always fun to be able to. Typical. But conflicting comments between the state and the county, I think that would be,
It's a good recommendation.
That's a good foreshadowing to the lead agency.
Yeah,
And they're, you're gonna have state roads, you're gonna have county roads, and how you work in between that is, well, there is no clear lead, but you gotta work through it.
so knowing that by October, we want to have some state level recommendations. I'm just wondering, is SHA kind of the main state body that is in play in these processes, or obviously it's around roads and storm drain stuff, but are there other agencies that get involved in this process that have different time cycles than county?
There are, and there are quasi-public agencies that do as well.
So not knowing who they are, who are we talking about, Diane?
He's muted.
Sorry, I have 3 screens because I'm trying to see the presentations and trying to juggle the mouse around. Sorry about that. So, and I'm sure that that Patrick and Robert can speak even better to this, but the PEPCO, BGE, these are Washington Gas Light, these are quasi-public bodies that also do have a role in this whole process, and so NSHA for sure.
Great, thank you.
So for what it's worth, I had a meeting with SHA on Thursday of last week, and we didn't speak specifically about, the presentation today because it had not happened. But I feel good about that relationship. And if there's very specific language that I could send over to them now, we can work in tandem. So that way we can start drafting things. Because, as I've said, as this work group concludes, I have about 2 days to get something drafted and introduced. And so, yeah, in the spirit of doing things concurrently, if someone can send me like the very specific things that you would like to see changed, happy to start that process now so we can.
things would be, or at least get their input to see if they, you know.
Is any, outside of this meeting, is there anyone willing to work on some of that language?
We will, we'll.
Yeah, and I
we'll
can work with
coordinate.
Robert. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just don't, I don't want to lose the point here, given what you're asking for. And
But I also think we need to hear from at least the two developer
Yeah.
representatives if they have any suggestions, because you're the ones who deal with this on a very regular basis. So, I mean, we brought up this issue, and Gary, I appreciate you bringing it up again. And Kate, if there's other suggestions that collectively the group can pitch, then we're definitely, willing to do that.
At a minimum, like syncing up the review timelines and timeframes seems like the most obvious and simplest of changes. If there's anything else, I'd like to hear from you though.
Eric, anything else to add beyond what's been said?
Not right now.
No. Okay.
So, with this, a histogram is like a powerful tool to help to identify areas where we might want to look into and ask questions and assess how we're doing and identify, things that we may be struggling with and not just, an indicator of that, but then dig a little deeper and try and get at a root cause so that we can kind of collectively make, recommendations or changes and implement something that addresses the root cause, track the data, were we successful at addressing the root cause, kind of continuously. This is like a continuous improvement process that I'm kind of advocating for here. And so I took, just like I did for the DOT data, I downloaded the data that's available on planning's website from the DRC. And so they've got different categorized or categories of time frames. And so one of them is intake. And so I think that is, I'm not exactly sure how they define intake, but I think, is it from the point where there's an acceptable submission to, and I don't know what the end of that process is, but there is a column in their data called days of intake.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just plotted those up. And again, these are also in those one week buckets. And I think from their spreadsheet last week, they said they got a 10-day target on intake. And so there's 2,091 applications in their data that's up on their website that have, an number of intake days listed. And so if you graph this out with the performance target, anything to the right of that performance target, we're exceeding those 10 days. Now, I don't think it's not a regulatory performance target. I think it's a goal, an internal goal. But we're seeing 88% of those applications are exceeding 10 days on the intake process. And that's where, we look at the average. Looking just at the average can be misleading. You gotta do the histogram. You gotta plot it out and see, because we may want to look at some of the ones in this time frame, because we seem to have a lot of applications that are in that 1 to 2 to 3 month. Forget about these ones that go real long, right? You might be able to identify some common issues or root causes in this area and have a lot of impact in streamlining things. Similarly, I looked at the.
Can I just ask one quick question? So we're talking about, this is a pre-application period as it's going through towards getting accepted.
This is what's called the intake process, and I think Robert described that. I don't want to mischaracterize what it means, but
Well, it's a cycle. So you have, and the reason the timeline is probably longer is that when an application is submitted, we have 10 days to review it and provide comments back. And there's no timeline for the applicant to resubmit an application. So when they resubmit it based on the comments that we get, and it's not really reviewing the plan, it's intended to be, is the information accurate?
Is it complete?
Is it complete?
Okay.
And so once that applicant returns the information based on the comments that we provided, that 10-day cycle starts up again. So again, we have many applications going on at the same time. So that's why the intake process could be 20 days. It could be quite some time. It really depended on how long things get resubmitted, but also our timeline in terms of the comments that are being provided.
So that's really, that's helpful, because you combine looking at the data with, understanding how the process is supposed to work. Are there things that we can do in here to clarify what we expect to see? So I'm thinking of, okay, if an application comes in from a developer and it doesn't meet the requirements, in my mind, that's a defect. This is like Lean and Six Sigma. That's a defect, right? So what can we do to our process to eliminate a defect at the beginning of the process? Is that better? Is it like templates? Is it better instruction to the developers? Is it training of the developers? I don't know. But those are the kinds of questions, when you look at the data, those are the kind of questions that jump to mind. And you ask, okay, what can I do to address this defect? And then we implement something, we test and we see, is it working? And then, we say, all right, it did, great, or it didn't, or it did somewhat. How do we further improve the process?
I'm not so sure I would call it a defect. I mean, there is a checklist of everything that needs to be provided. Sometimes it's missed. Sometimes it's, hey, we need more clarification, or you didn't sign the document, you forgot your north arrow. It could be a variety of things. That some could be very simple, some could be a little bit more detailed.
What's DOT's role in that?
Yeah, this is just data coming off of the website. I wanted to take the same approach that I applied to the DOT data and just demonstrate for a few of these how I think we ought to be looking at all our data and DPS, DOT, planning. I think following the data will help us zero in on where we need to focus.
Yeah, so in Robert, again, just so I'm understanding too, because I'm less involved in the intake side, but someone submits their plans to us for review, a preliminary plan, and we review it, and it goes back to the applicant, and 30 days later, they resubmit. That's all counted in this timeline.
Yep.
So
that could be looking at it, understanding
stop
the
to clock,
process.
and we don't start again once it's in, and then
That's
it continues to run. So if someone
intended to be very transparent on how long it takes to get through that process.
Yeah, so from initial submittal to final approval to be distributed to the plan teams, there could be 1, 2, or 3 review cycles. And we have do we have a way to track how long it was with applicants?
You're saying that each time it starts the clock again. Is that what I'm hearing? Start.
Yeah.
Well, it should, but it seems like once it's submitted, we could have reviewed it in 10 or whatever days, sent it back to an applicant, and 30 days later they would submit, but the clock hasn't stopped. It's continued to run. And so we're seeing data like a 10-day review target. We may have met that, we may not have, but this is all counting how long the applicant also had it and could have resubmitted with comments. So it's not.
We can break that out though, because it's in e-plans.
I think the 10-day intake is like our DRC comment tests. I think there's a hard stop on it. I think
there's a stop, but what he's showing here shows the overall timeline.
Right, no, I just meant, I don't think that the intake reviewer can really go over 10 days. I think the task times out.
Probably clock times out, yeah.
There's that. So
it does time out.
So that 10-day hit is getting hit as 10 days every time. And then.
So if I may.
The entire running clock, because we're trying to look at how long the entire intake process took, but that just runs while the intake reviewer is waiting for the resubmission, at which point they have another 10-day task.
And the way this is presented, like 88% exceeded the target or something, is making it seem like it took us 3 months to get comments back, but that's not really the case. So
can I I have a suggestion on how to talk about this, and I'd love to hear the developer's perspective on it, because I don't think that any of this conversation should be that planning staff is not doing something right, or that county staff is not doing something right. I think it is helpful, though, to look at the process on intake itself as well, to understand, okay, how long are things staying in intake? How many reviews are there? And if something's not moving forward, why is it? Because I don't think it's fair for us to assume that the developer team or the applicant team is necessarily even aware or understanding. And are there things that we can do as we're looking at this that might help improve the process so that it is less passive and a more proactive process? And I love project docs, but I also understand that is it is a pitfall to be aware of, because I saw it with our own permitting as well. And how do we become more hands-on? If there's a lot of if there are a lot of comments and several bites at the apple to try to get somebody in through the intake process, that to me suggests that, maybe there's a fix that we need to be at least thinking about. And by the same token, if there's a long lead time where an applicant is not responding, there may be some issues as to why, whether it is technology or something else. I'm aware of one situation that was a technology issue, and and also familiarity and how to make sure that everybody understands how to use the system.
Yeah, no, I agree with like everything you just said, Diane. That is like perfect. My only concern of the questions I'm raising is that the data that is being represented right now, that people in the public and others may be viewing, is like not accurate. This is not telling an accurate story based on the way it's labeled and presented. So if we get that accurate, then, and we all agree on it, then I think we can really get to the questions and the conversation that you're suggesting, which is very much the questions and conversation we're interested in.
So the data is accurate, right? This is the only data is here. It is what's your field of intake days. So what we need to understand is, what does intake days mean? Is it days between each individual submittal, or is it days that from the first time a developer submits to when their application is finally, approved to be accepted? And the reason why that's important is, forget about the performance target. If I'm a developer and I submit something and, 150 times out of the 2,000, it's getting into the system within a week, I think that's pretty good. But if I'm one of the ones, to what the point that Gary was saying, that in that 60 or 70 days time frame, then how can we help the developers submit more complete applications? How can we get to the point that, a significant, it's more predictable? I think I heard that from the developer. We like to be predictable. We'd like to not be in the group that, this one is taking a long time. And maybe some of these are the more, like, when we look at the data, and this just gives us an indicator of where we need to look, but when we look at the data, those 0 to 7 and 7 to 14, those might be single family things. Those might be the easy ones. And by necessity, some of the more complex ones may be the ones that are taking longer. I don't know, but it just, my intent in putting it up here is to show a process and spark us to ask questions so that we know where to find information.
Can I just say one thing? I mean, when I look at this, the data is incomplete, because first of all, there's not a standard of what you're actually looking for. I mean, you're just taking raw numbers and saying, this is what I see. But like he was saying, is like, that could be many review cycles within that process. I mean, at WSSC, when developers ask, well, why is this taking so long? We'll say, oh, it's 180 days or whatever. Oh, but we had 5 review cycles within that 180 days. And we would show them our review cycle was, 14 days. And then it got sent back to the engineer. Then it's the engineer's responsibility to, send back comments or whatever. and that might show 30 days, but you have to be able to break that out and say, well, it was 30 days with them,
Days
and then it came back. You know what I mean? So
But-
what you're probably seeing is something raw, saying when it came in to when we stopped, it was 30 or 40 days, instead of saying, hey, we also had to respond to comments 3 times. You know what I mean? So maybe that's why it took 30 days.
So if I could jump in for a second here, this,
Hold on one second, Diane. I want to see who else wants to speak. So then Diane, then Henry, Gary. All right, go ahead, Diane.
so in response to the comment that I just heard, and I'm not familiar with who the gentleman is, but, so I think there is value to this intake histogram because I think it shows a gross up of numbers. And I think that you can't look at it alone. And I think that's what Tim is saying. You have to look at, let's dig deeper to understand it. And this was my point from before, if we're having 5 review cycles on intake, and with all due respect, there are times that engineers, particularly ones who are not local, get very bollocksed up. I saw this with a college situation, get very bollocksed up, not understanding, but there was another problem as well, because what was coming in looked like spam and went to spam. So, I think that, and that ended up in a 5-month intake or 6-month, whatever it was. But the point is that if you have 4 cycles of intakes, comments and back and forth, you may be perfectly within your numbers on days for review, meeting your target, but you're still not addressing something that is a problem. And whether the problem is that, maybe and this is on the development community or the consultant community, maybe in the hurry to get something done, what is coming in is so absolutely incomplete that it cannot be accepted for processing, which I absolutely know that does happen. And then you would have multiple cycles, because then when you send back comments on that cycle, you're finally getting something that start to move towards completion. But it may be that there's just a problem if there's 3, 4, 5 cycles, somebody's not getting something, and we're being too passive about how to fix the problem. And maybe that's the point where we try to figure out, is there a point at which we have to have sort of a coming together where we pull everybody in and together to get it to an acceptance ready state.
Just before.
Mine's a great follow-up.
Yeah, but I think what's been said several times here is we really need to understand what is actually going on here, right? How many cycles on average, and who's kind of lengthening the cycle? How quick is the developer responding? Because these numbers themselves don't tell us that much.
Right, yeah, exactly. This graph doesn't show the question that we're asking, and that Diane was exactly right on. I think the point is, how many cycles is that's the question that we can ask of the data, like Tim is suggesting, that will tell us if there's an efficiency here. If we look at how many took 1 cycle, how many took 2, how many took,
that would be a very,
if a lot of them are taking a lot of cycles, then there's something to dig into on, can we make it clearer? Is the checklist confusing or something? I don't, but
Has the
but I don't
work
even
group
know the
established,
problem from, because this doesn't show us that. The question is how many cycles.
has the
Here then, Gary.
has the work group established what data or what information they're looking for in order to be able to solve whatever?
Not as explicitly as I think you're asking, not yet. Gary.
So, a lot to unpack here, but I think we are comparing apples to oranges because of 2 different systems. So, and 2 different, like WSC, when we submit a plan, that goes in, there's a checklist, there's a review fee, it's accepted, and then the review cycles are actually the review of the engineering. The intake is, I'll call it minimal, and same with Proj docs. When we submit a storm drain plan to DPS, there's a checklist, there's a fee, it gets submitted, it gets accepted, generally straightforward, but then you're in the review cycle. So when we talk about DRC, it's intake is everyone talks about intake thinks it's 1 step. It's a number of steps.
Right.
Because just my brief overview is we apply online, we get a number. Once we get a number, we have to wait and or coordinate to get a upload task. Then we upload. And then that's where this 10-day cycle comes into play. Sometimes it's just not checklist that you uploaded XYZ. It's like starting to read comment on the project. So maybe that's a discussion we can have. But after that, you need to get the fee confirmed. Then you got to write a check and get the fee down here. Okay. Then after the fee, and maybe you're on your second cycle of, you know, you got your traffic study, you got your forest plan, you got your preliminary plan, all that, the 12 departments it goes to. Once that's all okay, then they tell you gotta do your mailing and your signposting. So that has to be done, and there's
Just all, this.
this is all intake.
Yeah, all intake.
This is all intake. Well, and then once finally all that's done, you get your acceptance, then DRC is scheduled. So intake is it's a process. So that could be a whole study group on its own on how to, yeah.
I know Christina's been making some efforts to try and streamline that, so.
Yeah, and sometimes you get, you know, you apply for the number, you get that right away, we upload, and then you get comments in a day or two, and then, or you get, here's the check, we already have the client teed up. You know, they won't let you send in the check until it's confirmed, which makes sense versus writing 2 checks. But sometimes the client can write a check in a day, other times you have a couple hundred or $100,000. It may take a little while to get the bank check or transfer the funds. So that's it gets complicated real quick. So,
But is that what Gary's talking about? Do we have good data on what that looks like for
but
development?
that breaks down intake to it's more complex.
Right. It's not, like you said, not a one-step process. It's like a dozen steps.
Right, so, yeah, so one, thanks for taking the first crack at this. If it's our function, we can go back and I think address some of the concerns that we were raising about maybe just making sure that the information may be the same, but we want to take a look ourselves and then show the information as it's being presented. We'll try to really focus on this bulk of the area that seems to be spilling over the initial 10-day review target, and then hopefully have
It's
some.
also about what are you trying to present and what are you trying to, you know, what's the goal? You know what I mean? And trying to identify where you can find that within the data.
Yeah,
You know
sure.
what I'm saying? You know, data is good, but it's also what are you trying to find by using it? You know, you can put this and then you can change it to whatever to identify certain things and it'll be a totally different table.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's all the same information. So it's about what are you trying to identify within that information?
I agree completely with that. I think the goal of the intake group is to make sure that the reviewers get a package that is complete and accurate so that they're not making comments that should have been addressed maybe with intake. And so the whole point is that they get a complete application that is ready to go to be reviewed.
How can I just say, like, in WSC, we minimized our intake as much as possible because we figured we didn't want intake to kind of like spill over into what the design review would be. You know what I mean? So we tried to minimize how much.
Well, that's where intake for WSSC is. It's the same word, but it's for an engineering permit.
They're the ones who take all the project. That's
Right,
what
right.
I mean.
Versus intake for a development plan is
No, I
a
understand.
process.
Yeah,
And
every-
similar DPS. 'Cause-
Yeah, every internal process.
So many different agencies.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, in order for us to try to streamline it, we took away certain things that we, you know, it's learning. You know, when we first did it, they were more, you know, restrictive, and then we kind of took away certain things so that the process can move smoother. So.
Steve, it's almost 11 and there's a lot to get through. Do we
Yeah, I know.
want to come
That's
back
right.
to
So
intake
we're
and-
way over time on this. Obviously, this is a really important conversation. Really important that we understand the data that we're looking at and where some of the real issues are. Tim, thank you for bringing it to our attention. And planning, we'll go back and kind of look at, so what's really going on here and what do the cycles look like? How often does that occur? What kind of delays happen, et cetera, et cetera.
Through these real quick, just to show you the kind of analysis that I think is necessary to then lead to the questions we want to ask, to then process mapping. This is what lean is. It's looking at, you know, the data, looking at where do you want to improve, map out the process, then come up with an idea to improve the process, measure it, did that improvement help or hurt, and then kind of continually improve. Because this, ultimately, if you're doing
What is this one?
This one is NRIFSD. So this is taking from the data in DRC. It is after that NRIFSD is accepted to the date the NRIFSD is approved. So there's no statutory target for this. There's no deadline for this that I'm aware of. Perhaps there is.
There is.
Oh, there is? Okay. So, but I wasn't aware of it, so I didn't put it up there.
Please break down that.
Natural resource inventory for stand delineation. It's basically mapping out the resources that are on the site that could be impacted by your development.
It's an existing conditions
Existing
plan.
conditions.
So there were 294 of those. 80% of those, you've gone from, okay, this is a submission we can accept to you're done with NRIFSD. 80% of those are getting done in 3 months.
Sorry, Tim,
But
let me
DOT's
step in. So this is our application, not DOT's. Our project, our department reviews it. So the natural resources inventory for stand delineation requires the applicant engineer to go on site to essentially report, are there wetlands, streams,
Right.
buffers, steep slopes? There could be wild endangered species, and anything on site that would be relevant to establishing buffers or some type of environmental setting that we would want to protect throughout a development review process through any of the other applications that would then be filed afterwards. This is required prior to acceptance to many, if not all, of our applications. So in most respects, the NRIFSD and a transportation study are like the first things that an applicant has to do in order to even be able to file one of the subsequent applications for development.
Is it possible, this is a burning question, I'm sorry, there's like a zillion of them in my head. But, and we talked about this at the last meeting with respect to development in the master plan, right? Sort of driving what is supposed to happen in an area within a certain period. Is there some aspect of this that can be done or that gets done as part of the master plan so that the idea of attracting the development comes as an afterthought rather than waiting for the developer to find it and say, yes, can we put sidewalks here and do all of that? Like,
Well, I
maybe
think
that's a
from
precursor.
an existing conditions plan, there is I can't say a very detailed level because a master plan could be done and then 10 years later, someone comes in with an application, forest may change. Certain site conditions might change between a 10-year time cycle, but our staff does go out and verify through GIS, through other means, and even on-site visits, certain aspects of an area through a master plan. But this is really dealing with the more specific piece of it. And even at master plans, we don't know what properties might get consolidated to come in or might stand alone on their own to cover an existing conditions type plan.
And I would say the amount of resources required, I mean, this is like really fine-grained, detailed information that if a master plan is hundreds of thousands of acres and multiple properties across multiple contacts, that could cost.
I'll give you an example. So if you look at New Hampshire Avenue, Cloverly area, right? And the little bits and pieces of development that are happening around there now are somewhat inclusive of the master plan a little bit, right? Maryland Briggs Cheney's like over there, but still like there's stuff connected in Cloverly. And there's areas there that can be developed. Either we are waiting for the developer to come and see the land and say, let's do something with it, or I'll give you a perfect example. There's a permit, there's something going on the left side of the street, and there's a land that's been for sale for like 10 years on the right side of the street. If there were some, and I hear you, the resources and the funds, and like who's going to pay for that? But at the same time, we know that development follows development, and that as people continue building on that stretch of land, more people are going to find it valuable and want to build on that stretch of land. So in looking at the infrastructure support for that area, is there an opportunity there to kind of do some of the things that you're talking about only happen after an application is submitted so that it helps to move the developer's process along? It kind of addresses the stormwater and the WSSC and all that septic. Like, I can't for the life of me understand why the Burger King is taking that long to go up. Probably because the it's mostly septic over there. I have no idea, but I know that I see other, and maybe, I know it's not their money, but I know you see other fast food chains in different areas get built very quickly up and operating. So from my very layman, perspective in observing the development and listening to what you all are saying, I'm just looking for opportunities to maybe get ahead of it. I think, I keep saying this work group has an opportunity to be progressive. And I keep hearing like, this is what's happening, but is that what needs to happen? Does it need to be faster? Like you guys are like, well, this is, we have to work with what we have, but do we? So, like, I feel like those are the questions that can also be answered as we're looking at the data. And I hope that we can do some of both at the same time.
So I want to do a time check again, because we're more than a half hour past the time that we had allotted for Tim. And I know we've still got ASON, and we've got Alan, and we've got lead agency. We're not going to be able to deal with it all. So
I think I got 2 more, so,
Okay.
or 3 more. This is just the same data from the day we accept a sketch plan to the day that it goes to the planning board. So you can see there's only 30 of those type of applications in the DRC data. It's probably not a big volume of work in the grand scheme of things. You can see that the statutory requirement appears to have an effect, like a lot get done right on time, but 40% don't. Similarly, the preliminary plan, again, you can see the statutory requirement has effect. This is days from when we accept a preliminary plan to the day that the planning board has its hearing. And, there's 121 of those applications in there. You can see, you look at that spike right next to the performance target. So you can see that does have an effect, but 37% exceed that requirement. And so that got me, also for site plan, same kind of thing, 120-day requirement. You can see 280 applications came in with site plan. You can see the impact of the performance target, but then 30% are exceeding the requirement. So those are areas where we may want as a group to ask to dig deeper into the ones that are, that 30% of the time, to the point I think Gary made in either our first or second meeting, is if you're one of the ones that is taking longer, that can be a deterrent to bringing folks into the county to invest.
And just remind me, Tim, so this line is at like the 120-day mark.
That line is at the 120 days. So that is the statutory requirement for action on a site plan from once it's been accepted, when the planning board's taken action.
Can I just make one point of clarification? Typically, DOT does not review the sketch plan or the site plan. Their focus is predominantly on the subdivision or the preliminary plan. That doesn't mean they don't coordinate with us and with DPS on comments, but they don't. I mean, usually when we ask, hey, site plans, can you provide us comments? So like, that's DPS's purview. So the data that's being shown here, they probably meet the requirement because they don't necessarily have that big of a review in it. It might go to a different agency as a lead.
Just to be clear what this data is, this is straight off of your website. This is the day that the planning commission, MSCPC accepts a site plan to the day the planning board holds its hearing.
Yeah, I'm not hearing Tim suggesting that he's having a review or a role on this. He's just reporting on, I think, the information and data that he was able to pull from our website. I would still this is a great graph. I would like to see the data to make sure that we agree. But yeah, I'm not hearing that he's saying he has a role.
But again, I think part of what Tim's graphs are pointing us to, and we need to make sure that the data is correct and it's accurate and it's tracking the things that we want to track. But if things are going beyond kind of deadlines and timelines, and that's happening with a not insignificant percentage of projects, why is that? And are those the things that we need to take a closer look at, right?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. I'm sorry, I've been trying to raise my hand, but for whatever reason, it's not letting me.
My problem, sorry.
I think it's really helpful to start with the top down to understand it. And my understanding was, and it doesn't matter whether DOT has a role in this piece of it, because we're all part of this work group trying to collaboratively understand what's happening. And by taking the numbers, which was a really helpful tool that planning has put together, we can look at it from a top-down approach and then understand, okay, if there are problems that we're experiencing, and again, without attribution, where they may be, because it is a complicated process, let's try to dig into it and understand it a little bit better. And that's how I took those numbers. And I appreciate that he did it, because I certainly don't have the skill set to do that.
Great, thanks, Diane.
Just quickly, so looking at the previous graph and the ones before it, for the projects that exceeded the requirement, are all those, is it safe to assume they're all getting extensions?
Well,
Do we know
beyond,
that?
I'm assuming the data is accurate, then anything beyond 120 days would have needed an extension either from the director, which can approve a 30-day extension, and then anything beyond that must be approved by the board. So.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
So I won't dwell on these. This is just how long it takes plats. This distribution looks different than all the rest. It's flat. So, normally you'd expect to see a bell curve, and it's got this really tall part, 90 of the applications. And I don't know if that's the complexity of the plat. I don't know, but it just makes us wonder, okay, should we look at that plat process? I don't know. And then the last one, I just was curious from the day, I was trying to live a day in the life of our developers. So from the first time that they interact with us as government agencies to they've got their approval from the planning board, inclusive of they submitted it, it wasn't complete, we rejected it, they submitted it, okay, we accepted it, then we reviewed it. Then we get to the final action. So I went and took the data on DRC, and there's 1,572 unique projects in DRC. And so I just took for each of those individual and unique projects, what was the date that the developer made us its very first submittal, incomplete or not? And then what was the date of the planning board action? And how long is it taking a developer to get through our process? And so that's what this histogram represents. It's from the developer's perspective, how long they're in the system, regardless of who's contributing to how long they're in the system.
And Tim, to clarify, this is the development review process, the actual site plan.
Yeah, from your very first, okay, so I took like a project. You can sort in DRC, all of these have, well, not all of them, all of them are going to have NRI, FSD. They're going to have, sometimes they'll have preliminary plans, site plans. Sometimes they'll occur at the same time. All this is went through, identified all the unique projects, searched for that project the very first time that Gary, your engineer, hits submit to Park and Planning, and it gets recorded in DRC, in E-plans to the date that the planning board meeting was held that concludes. So this is, when we talk about it's not to permits, but it is, from where you start interacting with planning to where you're basically done interacting with planning until, you're dealing with DPS and things like that. So when you do that, like a third of these projects are getting through the process in 3 months, which sounds pretty good to me. Over half of them being done within 6 months. And I don't want to speak for what is reasonable, what your clients would like to see or not. That doesn't seem too bad to me for a more complex project. I don't know. Each of these vertical blue lines here, that's a year. 80% are done in a year, but 20% are taking longer. And
that's before initial planning board approval.
That is to get to the planning board's approval.
So just for point of clarification, is this for what? This is a sketch plan or is it site plan?
It's every plan. It's every plan. It's from the very first time the developer makes their very first submittal
to us,
Which plans does this cover?
all of them.
Like an NRI? An NRI doesn't go to the board.
What I'm trying to represent here is the developer doesn't care about, you know, how long necessarily I think that it takes NRI, how long does it, that's helpful for us when we're looking at processes and where can we identify opportunities for improve. What I'm trying to represent here is from the developer's standpoint.
Like a mandatory referrals in here?
Mandatory referral I did not put in here. I sorted that out. This is just 1,572 unique projects.
Here's the thing. I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt and talk with Steve perhaps about this. A little coordination on presenting our data. Like no, there's no coordination with us on this. I can't verify any of the information that we're actually reviewing and spending an hour or 2 hours talking on is accurate. We never had a chance to review it, understand which applications are being represented or not, if it's appropriate to include them, because it's like skew the data in a way that's confusing for people or just not accurate. There's no coordination ahead of time on this.
You all invited us to take a look at your data. That's what you said, that it was all there and all we had to do was go in there and look at it. And Tim actually knows how to look at it. For the rest of us, it's too daunting, but this is a, you know, first draft. I mean, we were talking about that and you all can certainly respond and go into the details, but this is just to get started on looking at the hard data about the actual plans and the approvals.
So just to answer your question, Patrick, we had a pretty broad conversation last week about time allotments and basic things that presentations would cover. I didn't see the presentations just like all, you know, until late yesterday, didn't really even look at them. So I didn't know what these presentations exactly would be about. But I totally agree with you that especially, you know, we can't undo what's gone on so far, but I totally agree that going forward, we need to have coordination if we're going to be looking at understanding data, understanding pain points, understanding delays. It's got to be some kind of mutual collaborative exercise.
Yeah, I mean, again, so not to hammer the point, but we were told we would get them yesterday morning. We could have looked at this, given some question back and forth, perhaps cleaned it, gotten to a position where we actually felt more comfortable. I'm not saying, oh, let's not have this conversation. It's the whole point of why we're having this conversation. But the process getting to this point right now, it's hard to respond because we just have a lot of questions that I just can't say that this is accurate information or not.
And I don't think, Patrick, anybody's expecting any responses today. I think there was just, hey, based on what Robert presented and, you know, your dashboard, I think Chris McGovern did. So based on that, when you go and dive into it, there's some question comes up, and behind everything, there is a story. You know, I have talked to Robert before, so there is a story before at the intake. It takes some time. I mean, you know, the numbers are the numbers. And so if we're going to be looking at it, so you take it from beginning at the intake all the way, and I wouldn't stop at the planning board because planning board approves it, but it's not a certified site plan. It goes on for a few more months. So really, that's really the time you should be looking at it if you want. I mean, that's what the applicant, that's what the developer is going to be seeing. So it's a complete from beginning to the end and the timeline it takes. And absolutely, you're right. There are parts that you're responsible, but the part that goes to the applicant, and we go through the same thing at DPS. They come and say, well, your time is taking, you're right. This is how long it was on. We had it, how long the applicant had it, and that's what it was going back and forth. You're absolutely right. So those are really, it's just the timeline. Nobody's saying, hey, pointing the finger at anybody. What's the story behind it?
Yeah. And I think what needs to happen, though, is that we agree on, and to the point you've made before, what data do we need to look at? Are we collecting it and presenting it in the right way? Are we interpreting it in the ways that make sense for finding delays, pain points, and at what's actually happening? So here's what I'm going to propose, given that we're an hour and 45 minutes in. I'm going to ask for a 5-minute stretch break because we still have a lot on our agenda. Take a breather from this conversation, which was intense at a few times. Gary, I'm not sure we're going to have time to start lead agency review.
I can follow up
We'll make sure that we get your perspective afterwards. But next, we're going to go to Asan's presentation from DPS. All right? 5-minute break. So don't leave the building. Do you know if you're gonna be able to project?
I did, you already did.
Awesome, all right.
Yeah, the next 2 weeks.
All right, if we can get settled again.
By the
I think we got it resolved. They have to modify the plan.
They're sort of the same as.
All right, I'm circulating the sign-in sheet, so if you haven't signed it, make sure you get a hold of it, and if we run it, got a second page, clean page that we can work off of. All right, so let's get started.
Sorry, all right now.
No, you don't need
Back in the game.
Just leave that like that.
Just leave it on?
Okay.
Testing, testing.
1, 2, 3, right?
Keep warning me about it.
All right, so next we have ASON's presentation around DPS and their roles in the process, timelines, et cetera, data. I've asked him to talk really fast, so we have time. No, I'm kidding. But to be acutely aware of time, because we don't have a lot left in this meeting, and I want to make sure we're not going to get through everything we plan to, but get it in as much as we can.
And I believe my presentation going to go faster than Tim's. I think at the end, there are a couple of the slides that planning and staff may have some questions, and also I have to make some correction to the PowerPoint. As you said, we were working really late until the evening trying to get this out, so there are stuff that if it's not correct, and I ask for comments. If they are not correct, please let me know, and we will make the correction as needed. Again, Hassan Mutazili, Deputy Director with DPS. So today I'm here to talk about Department of Permitting Services and our mission and functions and what we are compromised of. So what you're going to see for the rest of the PowerPoint is going to be a DPS overview. Talk a little bit about the DRC. This is just at the process and what we do. Then there are 5 divisions in Department of Permitting Services. We have zoning and code compliance, residential and fire code compliance, land development, and commercial. We also have customer support and outreach, which is really our intake. They're the intake, they take all the application as to the people that park and planning. And once everything is done and they make sure the plans are correct and everything is good, then it goes to the reviewer, goes through the whole review cycle, then it comes to them at the end. So at the intake, and then once all the review, the plans are approved, then for the issuance, and still there are outstanding items that have to be met. Is it it's agreement or outstanding fees, stuff like that. And new multifamily. So I got a couple of slides regarding our building permits. Like the dashboard. How long it's taking. Then some comments that I have gathered together from our subject matter experts that attend DRC meeting. Again, I don't attend DRC meeting. I think I attended DRC meeting a long time ago when I was over here in the beginning, and before that when I was in Prince George's County. But we have people that represent DPS, and some of the feedback you see is based on what I have received from the staff. With that being said, the first slide is about the DPS mission. It's the overview of DPS, and our primary mission is to promote the health, safety, welfare, and economic well-being of residents, businesses, and communities in Montgomery County with a timely
professional, transparent, and consistent review and processing of plans and permits, and through inspections of structures, right-of-way, and development. Roughly, we have like 30 different permit types. On average, we issue 40,000 permits a year. So this is not all building permit, land development, people come for driveway, fences, signs, shed decks. It's a compromise of a lot of stuff. Developer review committee process. This slide really, I believe a lot of people have talked about it. This is the DRC that DPS attends. This is really some of our roles and function and our participation. So the system that we use is Project Docs electronic system. I think WSSC is using the same thing, park and planning, and so does DPS. The people that we have to attend this meeting are from our stormwater people, our right-of-way people, and zoning. And all the comments, all the drawings, it's all stored in park and planning project docs, not DPS. So we review the plans on their project docs and provide the comments. That's how the comments goes back and forth. DPS role in the approval of development projects, I already talked about that. And also, what I wanted to say, DOT is the lead agency for collecting comments for the preliminary plan, and DOT is the lead agency for collecting comments for site plan. However, both DPS and DOT have a role in making comments for both application types. This stuff comes up, and it's at the site plan, and there were comments from DOT in preliminary, so we need to discuss, hey, does this stand? Developer is bringing something else to the table. What state laws and zoning codes we enforce? So Montgomery County Zoning Ordinance, Chapter 59, MDE, Maryland Department of Environmental Regulation, that's for all the stormwater. Chapter 50, Subdivision of Land. And the section that I got over here really talks about responsibility for the Development Review Committee. This is the stuff I think Patrick mentioned it at one time, the timeline and all that. That's where it comes that we have to stay within those timelines. Chapter 50, again, for the plat processing, the timeline that we have to adhere to it. We also enforce Chapter 49, the streets and roads. So during permitting process, all the permit is obtained through us, and then the inspection. And once they're all constructed in accordance to the regulation and the DOT standards, bond is released, and those roads are turned over to DOT for Tim and his group. And his slide, he speaks about, millions of miles that he has to, I'm sorry, not million, that he has to maintain. When the process, about the process, how often it happens and the timeline with that, pretty much, I think you have heard it from Tim. So the week prior to the DRC, there is a pre-DRC in which referral agencies meet to discuss the agenda items for the upcoming DRC. In this meeting, agencies discuss concerns and comments for the proposed plans and try to work out any discrepancies. Comments are then due to the lead MNC PPC staff review by the Friday prior to the DRC and are then made available to the applicant, giving them time to review prior to the DRC. DRC is the opportunity for the applicant. This is now, it's occurring online, that the applicant come and the subject matter experts from various agencies are there. And that's when the applicant, if they still have some question, they try to resolve it at that moment. I think DRC is really working very well. I know in the past there was issues with that, but I think there were correction made, and Rose Krasna was over here with Robin, and really they stick to it. They know the timeline. They would know, really honestly, they would know better than me or anybody at the executive agency who is really delaying or not on time providing their comment. And from what I've heard, I think most agencies are on time and do a pretty good of attending, participating, and also offering their comments. So DPS records related to the developer review process. Our system works on permit application, not in the development process. We do not keep any separate file. I already talked about those things. I'm going to move on. Information reflecting DPS position. Again, everything we have, it's on electronic, it's on project docs, and also the timeline and all that is provided on the above here. This slide talks about our zoning and code compliance division and what they do. Protects the quality of life, public health, safety, and welfare of Montgomery County residents. This is accomplished through the effective application and enforcement of the Montgomery County zoning ordinance, zoning ordinance development standards, Maryland National Park and Capital Park and Planning Commission certified site plan requirements, and emergency vehicle access. So pretty much what you have over here. And we're talking about the site plan. Once the site plan is approved and is certified, the applicant comes to DPS for a permit. But at the same time, we have a group of people that deal with all the amenities, all the requirements, conditions, triggers. And as we go on, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. So we have to make sure, hey, they adhere because they have gone through the public hearing and everything has. It's a really a legal document that the applicant must comply with it. We also, what they do, they also, our zoning folks investigate and respond to complaints. So these are complaints that are within Chapter 59. It could be for all sorts of stuff that it's legal or illegal. Somebody could be operating commercial operation from residential zone. They could be working on vehicles that don't belong to them, you know. So it's a lot of stuff like that comes to us. Residential and fire code compliance division. This is our residential folks. This is really, you're dealing with all the single family home. So this is just to tell us, hey, that division is over here. We get really the connection with park and planning would be in regard to, you got the big subdivision that you have all these single family homes and they have to get the building permits and then everything else, construction of the road and everything else that's associated with that building. So that's what I wanted to say. That's what I'm just moving fast. Land development. So what does land development do? Land development participates, and that's really an important part of the whole DRC, especially with the stormwater concept plans and the right-of-way. So responsible for ensuring the protection of the county's land and water resources, the protection of the environment, the safety of residents and businesses through its engineering and inspection functions related to stormwater management, sediment control, floodplain management, a special protection area, storm drain design and construction, roadside tree protection, tree canopy enhancement, record plat approval, well and septic system reviews and approvals, and working the public right of way. At any time, if there is any question, let me know. I'm just going fast. I don't mean to bypass anything. Commercial, really, as it comes, this is our commercial division. Really, this is the division that deals with everything that has to do for ensuring public safety through the effective application of commercial buildings. So you're dealing with the structure. We mentioned some of this a few weeks ago: electrical, mechanical, fire safety, accessibility, and sustainability, and also all the energy codes that's going through climate change. Some of the building codes we deal with, I honestly don't want to bore you with it, but these are really talking about accessibility codes, the commercial build that is all under ICC, International Building Codes, green building, IGCC, energy conservation, commercial fuel gas, electrical, fire, alarm, fire, and safety, it's all NFPA. So it's sprinkled, commercial, and residential. Everything that you see when you walk into a building, we want to make sure that the people, once there is a use and occupancy, you are safe attending or going to the meeting, such as this building. Permitting process, we used this slide before. Really, the process is when the site plan is approved and they come to DPS. it's two track. One above is really with the building, with all the commercial building that they're coming, and they go through the process of the reviews, as I mentioned, commercial, structure, electrical, and below is the land development, the right-of-way permits for stone drain and paving, and also stormwater and sediment control permits that's associated with those jobs. Okay.
Just a quick question on the previous slide. So are these, is this meant to demonstrate this is happening in parallel, or these are just, it's two different processes on two different?
So really, it is parallel, and in some cases it could not be, but it is parallel from the standpoint of when you're coming for a commercial building permit, it also kicks in review for land development, which is below, which would be your sediment control, your grading. So you want to build this, nice mix use apartment in downtown Bethesda. Fine, it goes through all those review, but at the same time, for grading and protection, sediment control, those they kick in, and those really the permits from land development should be issued and installed on site before the actual construction can start. So yes, they all work hand in hand. This slide represent, this is timeline from 2018 to 22. This is really commercial building permits. This is all new, so this includes the park and planning projects, but also interior alteration, addition. Some of the park and planning don't get, but the timeline, as you see, for the permits that have came in, on the average, these permits are issued in 76 days. Review days average 48, and which is the asterisk is it's us as our timeline, DPS, park and planning, and HHS. Applicant days, so you got 76 days, 48 days is with us, and 36 days is with the applicant. The number on the bar chart, it shows the number that have been coming by the year, and then also the applicant days by the average time that they're taking to perform the review and returning it back to us. This part over here, this is really, again, this is from the time, so we took into account, we were talking about the intake and all that before with the team's slide. So this is include the screening, and again, the screening should be done for efficiency correction. Really, it's a punch list, and we used to have a lot of problem with this. So that was something that over time we were able to control and get it to a point. The numbers are a lot better than what it used to be. Something that was taking weeks in some cases on the average, not months, but really going into weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Now it's done in 3, 4 days. But and then once it goes through them, then it goes to the review. So this is really on the right. You see the timeline. For example, for the structure review, how many days it takes taking them to perform the review and returning it back to the applicant. Architecture review, 8 days. You got electrical review. You got green building review. Right-of-way review, 30 days. Right-of-way also includes the stormwater and sediment control. Zoning review. You got well and septic, HHS, and not a lot of these jobs have to do commercial with well and septic, so really they don't get that many numbers, but that's why you see a 1. They don't. It's right. Really, the review is very minimum and it's done pretty quickly. If there is any project that comes, that they don't rely on WSSC, water and sewer. We got HHS timeline, 4 days. You got park and planning, 17. Sub-process, this is the stuff that's happening, again, within the DPS, within the subgroup, that they are sending it back and forth to making sure the reviews are done correctly and in time. And once it's done, go all the way to pre-approval, it's batch stamp and done, and it's ready for issuance.
Tom, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
And it's probably more for the group, but commercial permits, that doesn't mean just, that's not office, right? That is a certain type of building type, right? Because I saw your next slide is on multifamily
multifamily,
and
right? This is-
low-rise, but multifamily could be a commercial permit.
Right, so those, the next slide, I can come back to this if you want to. And this one really, that's where you see the number is like 274. So we went and picked the ones that came, that was check mark for park and planning. So these are the stuff that have gone through the site plan process, approved, either within this time period, or they might have done while back, or it could have been amended. So these are the timeline for really the site plans that you have, multifamily, the high rises, and it could be like 2-story, 4-story, a bank,
But not necessarily single-family homes.
No, this
Okay.
has nothing. This is
Right.
all commercial,
Thank
no single family home. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, commercial, no residential. This is everything that you see over here, commercial.
And I'm sorry, can you go back one? Just really quick.
So this is our dashboard that we are working on, and these are the numbers that it's coming up. So this is everything.
Sure.
So this is not just park and planning. This is a lot of, so you could be getting a sign permit. It could be, like I said, interior alteration, which park and planning doesn't get a review.
Right. And permits issued, right next to it, days to issue a permit average. And then
76.
review days average.
Right.
So we're saying, is that tile, the first tile, I guess, representing days from submittal to the actual issuance of the permit? And then the next tile, the 48, is how many days that the agencies had it under review, that there was 30-ish days that it wasn't under agency review. And I'm assuming that means we had comments, the collective, we had comments, and send a task back to the applicant. They had to revise their building permits and then resubmit.
Submit. And it could have gone back and forth several times.
So again, for the group and the public, I just want to make sure it was clear. The issue that we were bringing up in the first session is that the data was represented in a way like it looked as though the agencies were constantly under the clock and delayed in providing review. But I think there's a lot of question to that data, that the way it was presented, and that there's probably some period of time, I don't know how much because we weren't able to review it ahead of time, but some period of time where it was back in the applicant's clock. And that's not pointing fingers. I'm just trying to make sure, again, that the data that was presented is accurate so we can have as productive and constructive of a conversation about where we think we can improve.
And distinguishing between delays on the applicant side versus delays on the county side.
Right. And just most appropriately, where there are delays or where there are issues that we can talk about constructively to make a better and more efficient process.
So on this slide, the 36 is the days it was with the applicant, and that might be more than once, but total, the days with applicant are 36.
And again,
I'm sorry.
this would involve, some jobs are small, interior alteration.
Right.
So it doesn't really, it probably gets approved with the first review. Really, I would say this, that's why the timeline, if you look 76 days, but once you go to the next slide, so these will take longer because you're talking about more about complex projects that are coming, like I said, over our PowerPoint, the flow, the review that has happened with our commercial folks, talking about, again, about the structural reviews, about life and safety, NFPA. So those reviews take longer. It would probably goes back and forth. And again, if you look at it, 126 days. It's jumped from 76 to 126 days. So, and these are all, by the way, business days. So it's even longer than that.
And
So
again, the
if you look at for the month-
126 days on average from permit acceptance to issuance of the permit, and then 74 days on average was under the agency review. Thus, the 50-ish days was the time it took the applicant to respond to those revisions and then resubmit.
Right. So if you look at on the right, for example, your timeline with park and planning, it's 37 days. Our right-of-way folks, which is sediment control, 48 days, So those, again, remember when these are coming, maybe I'm jumping a little bit, there are requirements that zoning will not sign up on it, or park and planning, right, because they have not been met. A lot of them, they have pushed up the bar. MPDU agreement, these are the stuff has come on. Noise study, also mitigation that they have to pay for DOT. That could be the reason. So yeah, once you go in there, because as far as you reviewing the plan, it's not, you guys can go, oh, everything's paid, click and go. Really, it's waiting for the document, waiting for making sure all those stuffs are done. Especially the NPDU takes a little bit of time. And the bond, that's something that takes some time to make sure it's issued because they're coming, but that's not most of it.
Some, would there be, on some of these, you might have multiple permits, right? I mean, because you might have a one for a underground parking garage. You might have one for the
Absolutely.
structure itself. Does that represent this here too?
That's true. Well, these are all building permit associated with that job, yes. So
Yeah,
you,
and
So hold on,
so
hold on,
if
go
you're
ahead.
talking about, like, you have core and shell,
Mm-hmm.
so that's in there, and then you have for the entire.
And that would be part of the 274?
It should be part of that whole thing.
Right, so Henry had his hand up a few minutes ago. I want to make sure we get,
I'm sorry.
Usually
that's
you
all right,
get
that's
like
all right.
two-
And then Diane, you can go next.
Each one of them 2 projects.
I just like pick it. It's
doesn't
not
include
hitting on
unit.
all the like specific nuances. What I wanted to say, kind of a big, which was just more days doesn't necessarily mean delay that we should be looking for. The more complex a project is, the more days there's going to be, the more back and forth there's going to. So I just wanted to give us as a group like a caution not to jump into the higher days necessarily mean that there's a delay that we should be looking for. Like there's a lot of context and nuance on these.
Got
I
it.
think that too, though.
Right.
Also, some of these,
So, hold on one, Kate. Diane, then Kate, and then I also want to make sure, because I know Gary's got to go soon. I want to see if Gary has any specific questions or comments. You already
So-
made-
So one of the things that I just wanted to point out on this is that in response to, I think it was Robert said it, that what the county often does is if it's a complex project and there's an interest, a commercial interest that is very anxious to get something moving, they will split up the permit. So they may do a foundation to grade permit before they actually get their building permit while they're working through and still working through aspects of their design. That can definitely happen. But the other piece of it, and just from a statutory perspective for people to understand, the way things are set up legally, there are things that DPS cannot do until the completion of the development process at Park and Planning. So for example, technically there are permits that should not be issued unless the certified site plan has been released. And so it is a continuum of a development process. And I just think that as we're looking at it, we need to look at it, if you look at it holistically, keep in mind, it is a continuum. Keep in mind, there are things that can't happen statutorily. And if there are questions, we can answer that. And then the last thing I just want to point out, I think it is not productive to talk about who got what plan, what slides when, because we didn't see the slides in advance from the last review to be able to ask the questions. And everybody's just trying to do the best that we can to bring the information that we have so that we can have a fair conversation. And there will be time to review and discern and talk further about it. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Diane. Kate?
so with respect to some of the review time on the agency side, my assumption is 126 days is not consecutive. Like you could have reviews going on concurrently. So
Concurrent,
this could be a
absolutely.
faster time frame with concurrent reviews.
But there are some going concurrent review. So once you get with the commercial folks on residential, it's not. They have to go for zoning to approve before it can go. But with commercial, so for example, all the structure, architectural, mechanical, electrical, they're all happy because it's all project docs, E-plan. Everybody has access to it. Everybody's doing the common.
No, it does. I just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Yeah,
In
you
my head,
are
I was thinking that, but
absolutely
I
right.
wasn't sure. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Lisa. That's on. I don't think
I don't have
anyone
to
else
for
has
another
questions.
10
You don't-
minutes, so.
You're good.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned
Amanda.
that MPDUs can take a long time. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, it's the agreement with DHCA. So once the certified site plan, and usually that's pre, so for us, we will take the application, but zoning will fail it because those agreement, the number is associated, it's all on the site plan. Is it 12.5, is it 15%? But they determine, correct me if I'm wrong, the location in the building or on the site where they want to be. So those are the stuff that are going back and forth.
So Amanda, I think more pointedly, our conditions, whether it's a subdivision or it's a site plan, will have a condition that says whatever the requirement is, the number or the percentage of MPDUs. And it will say you can't pull a building permit until, or it might say certified site plan, you can't complete that until you have an agreement to build with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And that's really so that we get that locked in, so that there's not an argument about how many and where they're located, especially for multifamily buildings, because they'll do it proportionally by floor or by, within the floor itself or by the building itself.
Other questions for Asan continues?
Okay. So a couple of a couple of issues that has been raised against by the subject matter expert that have been going, and also we have talked about the issue with the lead agency. So as just a comment up there, the lead agency document is outdated. Everybody, we have beat this thing to death, and I think I'm glad that we're going to start talking about it. I think everybody agreed to that. A couple of issues are also raised, and really the one was with the parking issue. These are just some examples of the stuff that's going, that the plans are coming or are approved by park and planning. Then once they come for the building permit and they get it, there could be issues that comes up either during the review, because what's approved and what I'm talking about in the public right of way again. It could be some requirement that was put on them, have a brick paver or non-standard amenities that does not meet the requirement of Chapter 59 and the road codes. So those issues that have come out, like the issue I just mentioned, the flat. The next one, I have to take that out. I have received some wrong information on this. This issue with the Bellwood Campus Drive, the Johns Hopkins side, which is a really sensitive, important project. At the plat time, this issue had come up with the tangent in the road, with the horizontal tangent of the roadway. So that issue has been resolved, and the information I received from my own people, it's wrong. So I want to make sure this will be deleted from the PowerPoint. The correct one would be submitted. But more than anything, I talk about stormwater management. Used to be, and I'm saying used to be, this is during Rick Brush's time, there used to be some issues with the stormwater management, and some of the requirements that was being put on that at this time is really minimum or none. They really let us, really whatever we are saying, it goes. So it's not that, park and planning. Raising sign ordinance. So just one thing that has come up with the sign. Also, some of this site plan that come, they depict signs and all that. So we just want to make sure these signs and all that may conflict when they come, and especially if they have to go to the sign review board to get those plans approved, there could be some complication again that they don't meet. Oh.
May I ask, what do you mean by leave it to the subject matter experts? I mean, the idea here is that everyone is trying to find a solution to an issue or a problem. And I think that some of this is a little, maybe not quite accurate, but, and we'll take our opportunity to provide some feedback on it. But what do you mean by leave it to the SMEs?
So I think what has happened, especially with the flats, is it was going back and forth. Especially about closed section, and then what occurred was at the end it was approved, showing a swell in front of the building instead of having curb and gutter. And that's if we are saying, if we are attending to at the DRC meeting, and I think some of the rest of them really, it's some of those issues, the non-standards, so like bike lanes or some other amenities, bike racks or other things. These are on the other slides that are shown in the public right away. So either DOT is not going to accept it, or we are not going to accept those plans when they come to us. And that's why we are getting, if these comments are provided at the DRC, really That's why you have the lead agency, that's the subject matter expert. We think we should leave it to them. So there wouldn't be any conflict. Also, the conflict, there used to be this conflict resolution. I believe we were meeting on monthly or weekly basis, and I think that has dropped off. That you know, it's everybody's fault, not your fault. But that's something that needs to be picked up. So if we have issues like that, try to resolve it.
And just another follow-up. So the flats, there's a number of projects named the flats. Which one, are we talking Knowles?
No, not the townhouses, the new one.
In Kensington?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that has a swale in it, but well,
Okay,
again,
so I'll
the
check
flat-
on
The
that.
flats at Knoll Station.
without getting into kind of pointing fingers here, because we need to look at this and see what's exactly in place.
I can get you, that's the proposed building, that's the new one. Okay. That's coming up.
You're talking about 4 townhomes? on the
No,
corner?
not the townhomes. Just above it on the left as you go, on the nose, on the other side of the road from townhouses.
Oh, okay.
I'll get you. Also, there were some issues with the storm drainage and all that, can handle.
Right.
DOTs. Right. The storm drainage was not able to handle. So there were a lot of issues going on that.
I have a quick question. Can you remind me where in the process sign review, the applicant goes to sign review board? It's post planning board and before permit, right?
Well, when they come to, that's something, once, it has to be approved. Once the site plan is approved, that's the time they need to come, because that takes some time.
Okay.
You have to file application, and it's not DPS, Sun Review Board is on its own entity.
Right.
So all we do, we take the application, we take the entire package in front of the Sign Review Board, they review it, they comment, and either they accept it, or in some, mostly they accept it, but they could be comments about changing some sign.
Are we saying sign review board? So what, I'm not aware of what that is. So what exactly is that?
It's an agency, it's an agency that look at all, so if you have signs that they don't meet the requirement of the sign regulation as stated in the zoning ordinance, then you go to the sign review board. There you are. So you are coming, you want to put this sign, it's a huge sign on top of a building, for example, the outlet mall, Clarksburg, the sign that I put, hey, outlet mall right next to 270. That's not a standard sign that's approved, or it's in the ordinance, and the sign ordinance allows such sign. So you have to go, it's like a board of appeal, you go to another entity, they would review it, and they approve.
And I will say the council, was it last year?
Last year.
That we just did a very big, I know I worked on ZTA, rewriting that whole section of the zoning code. So that part itself is more streamlined. So I'm not suggesting changing that, but just a heads up that the council has recently reviewed at least what our sign requirements are and how often people have to go to the sign review board.
Does Diane want to speak?
Diane, do you have your hand up? Or are you good?
Sorry, I don't have my hand up. I don't have my hand up, but I do want to say yay, I think the sign ordinance needed to be streamlined, so good.
All right. That was a big undertaking. Just quickly, flats, I think the timeline is getting a little bit longer on the flats. And the timeline that's provided to us, or the way it's coming, I have placed that in here. You guys can take a look at it. I mean, I can't read it, but this was really how it's done. And really the suggestion again is for the intake to establish a timeline for screening the plats, not more than 1 day, to assign them to MNCPP reviews. I think that's taking a while just to be assigned. Is it possible that intake assigns the review directly to DPS rather than through an MNCPPC reviewer? That should save time, even if it's a few days. The other issues that I have over here is, so when you are ready, I was talking about this commercial building, it's approved by Park and Planning. The sediment control comes before anything else. And what's occurring that we are not able to issue the sediment control permit until the site plan bond is approved. So suggestion, either they should be approved before the site is certified, or even, because a lot of time on this, and I have it over here, we work with park and planning on a lot of this grading issue. We come back to Robert or we'll go to park and planning, hey, this is holding up. And usually we get the okay, go ahead and let them go to board. So it's a process we are doing offline. Somehow there was not, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was no requirement of the site plan bond must be approved before the sediment control permit had to be issued. I don't know if that's part of the zoning rewrite that came about, that was added, because that's when really some of this issue came with it.
There's no timing in the ordinance. It's usually a condition of approval that's either tied to a certified site plan or a record plat. So the idea is that you get all similar to a MPDU agreement, a noise analysis, you're getting your agreements or your bonds in place. I mean, you wouldn't release a permit for a road right away without getting your bond, right? Okay, same with us. So I think and that's usually spelled out and it's worked out with the applicant who has submitted the plans. And if we have to change it and they have a good reason for it, then we usually listen to them and do that.
And really, I talked about this one again. There was some of the issues that has come up over time with issues again in the public right of way, in the sidewalk, with the mailboxes, with the bike racks, and other issues. Non-standard that really the roads are not really public road anymore. You can look at Park Potomac, you can look at Pike and Rules and stuff like that. It's a public road, but really it's not a public road. You have an agreement, somebody else is doing it, somebody else is maintaining it. Again, because of the non-standard part of it. Just some numbers that our timeline on plats. So just tuning our own we are usually pretty quick when they're assigned to us. We review them and return them. So the overall plat is within the purview of park and planning. So we do our part. So I think that concludes my presentation. Did I do good on the time, Steve?
You did excellent on the time.
I think everybody was tired.
So any follow-ups on the presentation? And just kind of my own perspective, I see in a number of your slides, you bring up the issue of lead agency. And so I'm wondering whether after you respond to any additional questions, whether we just transition straight into lead agency, because it seems highly relevant to where we are right now. But any questions or follow-up comments on the presentation?
I have a sort of, I guess, semantics question, because I know DPS does like so many permits. And I want to make sure for this work group, we're only looking at the types of projects that also have to go to planning. Because in the zoning code, there's lots of development that never goes to park and planning, that you can just go to DPS, get your permits, hit the ground running. So I assume this work group is not looking at those faster projects. We're only looking at the ones that involve everybody.
Correct. Yeah, that's part of it. I agree.
I'm sorry, there was agreement here?
Yes.
Is there,
I was correct.
Is there agreement in general here? Yeah. Okay.
But Levu was right.
Duly noted.
Make a special sheet for agreements. It doesn't need to be a big one.
Yeah.
All right, so do we want to move to lead agency?
Could Alan just
Oh, I'm
do
sorry.
1 minute presentation?
Sure.
In the
What,
words
is
of
it really 1 minute?
In the words
A
of-
minute and a half.
in the words of a former interim planning board chair, I'll keep this short. DEP does reviews of subdivision plans with the purpose of ensuring that they are consistent with the county water and sewer plan as developed and approved by the county council. In terms of our performance on this, out of 352 plans that we reviewed in the last 5 years, we had on-time reviews in 95.5% of those cases.
We had late reviews in 4.5% of those cases, and some of those may be due to incorrect dates put into the database, so they need more review. One thing I was able to look at in this was that we do findings.
Sharing?
Hmm?
Are you sharing your presentation?
No, is this? It was sent out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's sent out. It's
Are
very
these
short.
slides or these, this is a handout, right? This is like a Word document that we're talking about?
Yeah, that was
This
sent
is
out.
a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
We either find that things are consistent or not consistent with the water and sewer plan. And in 97.7% of those cases, the findings were consistent with the water and sewer plan. It's the ones that are not consistent that create issues. There was 2.3%, not very many, 8 out of 352. But I think the important thing is that the majority of those where we had difficulties or dissonance were on concept plans, which is where that should occur. Somebody's coming in with a concept for us. Is this going to work or is it not? Sure. They have questions, I'm sure, other than what's going on with water and sewer. So that's, if there's going to be a problem, that's where we want to find it. And that's not on any specific timeline.
Alan,
Concept plans, Alan?
Concept plans.
Concept plans.
Alan, just one question. Those reports that you're doing, are they to the DRC committee?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So just
They go to
clarify.
DRC and they go into E-plans. Or project docs or whatever it's
Real
called.
quick though, Alan. So most people, most applicants, when they submit, they know what their water sewer categories are. So we're talking about ones that might be on the margin or they might need a change.
It's vastly improved over the situation, say, 20, 25 years ago, which I can actually remember.
Good.
So I think we're doing much better, especially the applicants are doing much better.
Great, thank you.
Great.
That's it.
Shortest presentation in the work group history. Robert?
I just had one clarification to one of the documents that was submitted about DEP reviewing the forest conservation plans, because I know that was already discussed by Christina, I think at the last work session. And we'll respond to these as well.
All right, so, Robert, I think we had you being the first person to tee up lead agency. And I may be forgetting who else we wanted to kind of weigh in before we open it up to discussion.
I think I was going to at least start it off, and the primary reason is because I'm one of the few that was around
with the history
when this came in. So I'll provide some of the history. I believe we were going to see if I know Hassan was here as part of this,
right?
And Diane was. So I'm happy to kick it off.
Tee it up, and then we can look to both of them to add on.
Sure. So I will provide at least as much of an overview as I can. So there is a memorandum of understanding known as the lead agency protocol. This is distributed to the DRC group that meets pretty much every other week. So they have this, and even new members that come in, it gets distributed by Christina. This was finalized in 2010, and it kind of took place between probably 2008, 2010, with the primary purpose of looking at how to streamline the process, which is kind of what we're talking about now as well. But also look at where there might be some disagreements among the agencies as to the lead agency. And just to kind of put that down in writing as part of the MOU as to who is the lead agency, who supports those lead agencies in the discussion, but also I believe where there's a statutory requirement by some of the agencies as well to provide feedback and to be part of this MOU. So there were 4 bullet points on page 2, and I don't have it pulled up, but I know it was distributed. And those 4 bullet points were redefine and reestablish lead agency roles based on current agency structure, analyze and recommend ways to reduce the delays caused by the need for conflict resolution, develop a procedure for resolution of disagreements within and among agencies and between agents, applicants, and an agency. And analyze the current operation of the Development Review Committee to determine where improvements can be made. And there's a lot that's happened between 2010 and now. I mean, there's been a number of different groups to focus on kind of streamlining, but also improvements. So again, the reviewers don't have this in their back pocket when they show up to every DRC meeting, but it is available to them so they know, and I would point out that the representatives from the agencies that show up to DRC, they know what their responsibilities are. I mean, it's pretty spelled out in terms of who does what. We have had, I think, some conflicts when we have maybe older master plans that might compete with new initiatives. It might be new policies that come out. One that's come up recently has been complete streets. So we've had a lot of discussions. I wouldn't say major conflicts, but discussions about which details to use, or which recommendations, one to use in complete streets versus the master plan, maybe versus chapter 49, and how do we kind of integrate that into an entire process. I will say that's what the DRC is for. So we have a DRC meeting, and then following that, or before that, there's what used to be called pre-DRC. It is not called that anymore. It's called interagency coordination meeting. And that really is intended to focus on any kind of discrepancies or conflicts between the agencies so that when we get to the applicant, we can collectively say this is our position. And if there's not agreement at that time, then we clearly state that we're still reviewing something and we can provide feedback on that. One of the things I would point out that was done as part of our recent retreat that we've implemented was following the DRC meeting, we have a coordination meeting for the applicants that want it to resolve any issues that have come up during DRC that we couldn't tackle at that point. So I think a lot of what is happening at DRC, both at DRC and post DRC, is definitely part of the lead agency protocol. And it's something that has changed a little bit in terms of just process. I would note that every document needs to be revisited at some point. And clearly this one has things in it that are not even relevant anymore because they don't have the right names of different groups. Sometimes, I mean, if you look at it, references the Fed committee. Well, we don't have a Fed committee anymore. It's now the PHP committee. We have a number of things that have come up, even like fire and rescue reports to DPS now, which I think that was a little different beforehand. They were their own entity. Private streets, in terms of lead agency designations, we also look at, the just names like traffic mitigation that's listed in here is now transportation demand management. So a lot of this stuff is textual, I think, in terms of what needs to be updated. But I think it's a good opportunity for the agencies to have the discussion about revisiting this at the appropriate time. So there's a flow chart on the back that was created to help understand some of the graphics in here about who's the lead agency, who's the support, and then kind of what requirements happen within that timeline. So again, that's a very quick overview. Some of the history as to why we got into this, I think there was a lot of discussion about utilities at the time, about where they go in the right of way, where the buildings are placed in relation to those utilities, whether they're in the right of way, outside of the right of way. So there was a lot of juggling back and forth about how do we ensure that the agency that's responsible for that particular element is the one who is in charge or in lead of that. So
one quick thing. So having gone through that document and not completely understanding it, but the flow chart that's in there is cut off. So it's not complete.
Oh, I see that.
And so it would be great if we could get an updated version of whatever got cut off.
Happy to. I'll look into that.
Sure. Mary.
I just want to say briefly that the real heart of the lead agency agreement MOU is to deal with a situation where there's a conflict in opinion. And the lead on, say, roads, it is trying to invoke a statute, a law. And what happens when planning would like to do something else? So it says, if the lead agency decision, this is 10B, is based on a legal or regulatory requirement or legally authorized policy decision of the lead agency. So think DOT or PS. The planning board decision on the plan will be deferred and the matter will be referred back to the department head of the lead agency. So it had these draconian consequences where they could not work out an agreement. And then earlier on in this lead agency agreement, it talks about after DRC meeting, if at the DRC meeting, I hate to use DOT all the time, but DOT says, sorry, but you've got have a certain width here. You can't just have this smaller road. Then they're supposed to convene these meetings like within 4 weeks. And it's that part that I'm understanding from the exec agencies is not being done.
But I think if you showed up to the DRC meetings, you'd see that they are being done. So a lot of those discussions are happening within the DRC meeting and even post DRC. So there's a lot of coordination that happens between the 3 agencies here, 4 agencies, from looking at the road rights of way, looking at the master plan recommendation, looking at complete streets now. So there's a lot of moving parts that go into that. And I do believe it is happening, but it's happening through the DRC process.
My question is, when was the last time that one of the lead agencies had a letter that went into the planning board decision and disagreed with planning? And so the planning board said, well, we can't move forward.
I don't know that we've had any of those, Mary. Because they've been worked out. And I think you see that the role of the different agencies has been to try and come up with a solution, not to be an obstacle.
Right.
And so I think that happens. And if there is a disagreement, when it gets to the board, both sides are presented. And the board and the public clearly has the letters from the agencies. And if there is a difference of opinion, and, I take that back. We have had some where DOT has recommended one thing in their letter, and the planning board through staff has not completely agreed with that one position. It might be one recommendation in their letter, not an entire letter, but one recommendation that they've made that maybe we've objected to, and we brought that to the board's attention, and both sides make their presentation as to what would be appropriate or not.
So debate, but I'll just add one thing that Ehsan's presentation cites quite a few examples, and I don't know, if all of those were DPS's statutory authority, but I think it's something we need to look into in a more detailed way because it can really slow things down, obviously. And, it's a ridiculous result for it to get to the planning board and them saying, we can't do it now. And so, but it's also a real issue.
Can I ask a question about the MOU? Because I'm looking at Section 8 of the MOU, which says that the staff report to the planning board will identify all interagency review conflicts that required lead agency decisions in the process used to resolve the conflicts. Does that actually happen? Because if it does, then we could look to these reports and see how and where it's coming up. But if it's not happening, then maybe we should have a conversation about that and how to manage that.
So you're asking how or whether conflicts get resolved? Is that what you're?
No, I'm not. I'm asking because what Section 8 of the MOU says is the staff report, which is the written report, to the Montgomery County Planning Board will identify all interagency review conflicts that required lead agency decisions and the process used by the lead agencies to resolve the conflicts. So this should be part of, for each project, if there are conflicts, it should be addressed in the staff report. My question is that happening? Because then we can get concrete examples too, besides the one that are ones that are being identified anecdotally, it would be helpful to see if they're actually, if this provision of the MOU is being followed.
And I do believe that's happening, Diane. I mean, if we look at the example that Hassan made for the Bellward campus, we objected to it, so did DOT, to the tangent spacing, and it was put in as a condition that says, it doesn't say we object to that. We say you're going to provide the tangent that is necessary that we both required. So
Okay.
conflict there was not necessarily between the agencies. It was between what was being presented to us.
Have a look at the language, Robert, that I was just referring to too, because I think, and I will say, I agree with you. I would say 9 times out of 10, I think that planning staff and county executive staff are not that far apart. There are some policy differences though, and there are some important consequences of when they are far apart. And Clarksburg is a classic example of problems with development. And I put the planning board into the cab of a fire truck to try to take them through, to show what happened going through the streets of Clarksburg and why people couldn't, fire and rescue can't actually get to the locations where there was a problem, or the fact that snow actually has to be literally trucked out of that community. But I mean, we're talking a couple, 15 years ago, a decade, 2 decades ago, that evolved over time, and there's been a lot that's happening. Again, these agencies work together very collaboratively for the most part.
And Diane, we can provide some examples if we need to, but I know that, and I've been involved with a lot of the meetings, both with DOT, DPS, and their directors, and our director, to try and resolve something before it gets to a planning board hearing. And we can provide some examples of those cases, happy to do so. And I can circulate those to the group. And just anecdotally, I was on that ride as well in Clarksburg, so.
I know you have some history with this dating back to when this was put in place, but just your quick observations and then Alan. If you have any.
No, absolutely. No, I mean, again, it was placed to really reduce or eliminate some of this confusion or at the end, somebody's got to make a decision and, we could see it one way, park and planning or somebody else, another agency. Really, that's what it was placed. If you're a leader, who's support? So that the lead agency make the decision. I think that was really what came out of the work group. And what we are saying was, I mean, then, and I think park and planning, I mean, it was done, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago. So like everything else, development has changed, people have changed, and a lot of responsibility roles have changed. So really, we got to look at it and see, it could make sense, or we could go over it and say, okay, a few items we need to tweak or change. So that's really the whole exercise. If we are doing this thing, that's an important piece of this whole process, in my opinion.
Yeah. And laws have changed too. And some of the laws have changed directly in response to some of these things. For example, the infrastructure, some of the street furnishings that are going into the public rights of way, we couldn't even issue permits because the law would not allow us to issue permits when something like that would show up on a site plan. And that put us into a whole situation, which was horrible for developers, where they had to go get a franchise agreement or something like that to try to meet what was in a park and planning requirement versus what the county law actually allowed for. That's actually been addressed a little bit, but I do also want to throw out caution which is that everything that we do, though, ADA is always going to be something that has to be looked at and needs proper attention for some of these desires for the complete streets. I'm just throwing that out there. That was as my public service announcement. I'm done.
Alan.
Yeah, like so many other things that we endorse, everybody signs off on it, and then it's put in a drawer. If you look at sections 14 and 15 on what is this, page 5? I can't tell. Yes, page 5. There was a reporting requirement to the council. Now, I'm sure the council hasn't minded that we haven't been sending this to them. At least I'm not aware that they've been sending it to anybody. But it does show that it recognizes that there would need to be updates to this periodically. And here we are 13 years later doing the first update. Sure. And there's lots of things that go like that. Instead of taking an update and putting it in another drawer, let's keep it on the bulletin board. So we keep updating it as we need to, as things change.
Hey, how does this impact the development community?
So in general, as a lot of people have said, and I agree with, park and planning and the executive branch agencies actually work very well together and are a lot of times in concert with a recommendation on a plan. And so from an applicant standpoint, that's helpful. It wasn't always the case like that in the past. Every once in a while, when you do run into, I think in my experience at least, it did, to Diane's point, it did used to be the utilities. And kind of we've worked through a lot of the utility issues now. You're very clear about where you can put your WSC infrastructure versus your dry utility infrastructure and how all that works together. Now we see it mostly in public streets. And I think that is because, to everybody's point, this document is a 2011 document. We are now in 2023. And people's expectations about what a public street will offer have changed. They've changed because of the way people live. They've changed because of COVID. They've changed because this county is not as much a suburban county anymore. It's becoming more urban. And I think because of all of these things, this document is just needs to be looked at again.
There's so many more things that are trying to be squeezed into the public right of way.
And so that's where we run into it.
Thank you.
On that note, I just want to bring up an example that I just feel like is a real life example of all of this happening in real time, combining ADA issues, right of way, DOT, complete streets, planning. And some of you may know what I'm about to say because I love to talk about this. But we're running into this issue in more urban areas. I see it happening in downtown Bethesda where developers are following the zoning code. The zoning code says you can put in a loading dock that's 40 feet deep. The problem is that's actually not enough. And the trucks that we're seeing are then jutting out and blocking the sidewalk and blocking pedestrians and blocking the right of way. And it's become this conflict. Now the law is being followed, or the zoning code's being followed, but how it's playing out is not actually working. So how do we go back and get that adjusted and changed from a zoning code perspective or from a agency comment perspective? Because again, it falls under all these different areas: DPS, DOT, planning, ADA issues, complete streets. Anyway, just thought I'd bring that up as like a real life specific example of how this can play out and work or not work.
And there hasn't been coordination. I'm sorry.
Therese, you had your hand up a little while ago. I just want to make sure if you wanted to weigh in. Sorry about that.
I'll just play off what Amanda said, because then that kind of plays into the process of like an exception or amendment. And I kind of was hinting to Jason and also to your point, like it's 2023, right? So one of the delegates' big things was policy, and that, oh my God, that just plays out throughout this county all the time. So the process to update a policy or the process for the developer or whatever applicant to get an amendment to whatever should definitely be a part of the conversation. So it's not necessarily the initial intake from the inception of a project, but okay, now whatever property you're talking about where we see the right of way is not working, who's bringing it up? Is it the community bringing it up to the person who owns it, who followed the rule to get the, thing? Is it the county DPS people driving around to see, how it's working? Yeah. I think all of these things play into how the 2023 version of this document in a progressive way is going to work going forward.
Sure. Mary.
And from the executive's perspective, Because the executive and the departments you've just heard from, they're responsible for making things safe and functional and working. And so as a consequence of the loading dock not being big enough, the trucks often have to park on the street. And as Kate was saying, those streets are now narrower than they used to be, and it causes conflicts and traffic enforcement issues. So to me, it's curious that this hasn't ever been resolved. You know, I know the technical stuff. The technical stuff is that planning has the lead on the site. They are responsible for the site. DOT is responsible the minute you leave that site and the egress is to the roads, and then the roads that abut and adjoin the site. But hey, you know, that's not good enough. So I think we should be thinking about in this, if we change this document, what could have led to a resolution of this? Because it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to have these people building all these loading docks that nobody can use or rarely.
Yeah. If I could on that, Meredith, I don't know if, because I don't know if anybody can see when I have my hand up or not, so I'm sorry for jumping in. I think it would be interesting also to see, because I know for a fact that DPS and DOT in the course of making comments on plans would bring up something like that. It's not just an issue for the convenience of whether somebody can access their sidewalks or not. It has to do with fire trucks, whether they can get through or not. And I guarantee you that at some point in time, these conversations and these comments were being made. What we have seen over time is an evolution of law changing to accommodate things that didn't accommodate what would have otherwise been code compliance. And that's been the solution. And if now the communities are having to live with something, with this disconnect between a reality and a living situation versus changing a zoning ordinance to allow for, or a law to allow for these different kinds of streets, I think that, I mean, that is a parking, no pun intended, a parking lot item, though. It is a bigger conversation. And I think it is one that is worth actually looking at, you know, what are the consequences of some of these decisions? Because I guarantee you that these comments were being made at the time that the plans were being circulated.
So I'm going to go to Robert next, and then I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
Sure. And I agree with what Diane said. I think it's we've had these conversations with Amanda specifically on loading, but it's not just loading.
It's not just loading.
It's many things, and we are picking back up the loading management access study so that we can address that. And again, that's just one issue. And to Diane's point, these issues are brought up during the review process and the review cycle, and sometimes it meets the code. And then when it gets to operations, it's not working the way it should. And I think, to me, that's the bigger issue. And how do we learn from that? And we have learned from that. We've taken a look at how some of these issues can be addressed with the applications that have come in. And it's not necessarily the width of the road that's creating the problem. It's kind of what's in the road sometimes. But it's also the access in and throughout that site that creates some of that. I would offer a suggestion that, you know, that we revisit this. I don't know that, I mean, maybe this is one of the comments that we send up to the delegate, because there's WSSC on here. SHA should probably be one of the lists here, and they're not. And then all the other agencies. And again, there needs to be some coordination on that to revisit, revise, and update this document. We're happy to see that happen. I don't know that that's going to happen before October. In fact, I would say probably not, but I think it might be one of the parking lot items, as Diane said.
Yeah. And these are some of the major zoning issues too. You know, the big, and to what Robert was saying, a big part of the problem that we see in our, and as I think maybe it was Tiffany who talked about becoming urban, in our urbanizing areas where it looks great. We are building our buildings close to the property lines, which of course wreaks havoc in the public rights of ways, which DPS would work and works really, really hard and has put in place special supervisors to try to manage this. But you can't make it all happen. You know, it's too many things in a very small bag that's happening and has to fit, and something ends up giving. And at the end of the day, you know, if you have your building right up to the right of way line, you're going to have an issue with where that loading dock's going to go and how the truck's going to go in, because how you're occupying and filling that site. So these, and in the end of the day, you'll see these are realistic conversations, not for the MOU perhaps, but I do think for the parking lot, we should absolutely be revisiting them. And I'll leave it at that.
So I guess the part of the question I have is, again, this is as someone who's a novice to all this. So clearly, I think there's agreement that this is a document that's now 13-year-olds that needs updating. But is the updating kind of an overhaul, or is the updating just kind of correcting what's no longer accurate, or updating based on laws or policies that have been put in place? It's not clear yet for me in this conversation of kind of where we land here in terms of significant change.
One, yes, we should actually refer to the actual sections, agencies, their correct names. Hammer has been gone for a decade or more. Things like that. That just basic level needs updating. And then two, yes, like again, it's been this many years, 13 years. There's a lot of different laws, regulations, policies, master plan. The whole thing has changed. So the concept is still there. I'm just going to respond to a little bit of this broadly. The concept is there. It's in process. I think, I don't want to speak for Kate. I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong. This is more or less baked into the actual review process. I think we do these things. I don't think there's any official report. If there's still a conflict, it's identified in the staff report. We say, hey, DOT, we have a conflict. Here's when we're scheduling. Of course, we got your letter. We've already been coordinating with you when we're producing this report. There's no like surprise here. Right. Let's come and like try to talk this out. We'll let the board and the applicant, everyone weigh in. We try to work together to put forward conditions and a solution that works for everybody, and then go forth and implement with the implementing agencies, the permitting agencies, et cetera. So none of that should be like a surprise. In fact, I don't think it is. I think we communicate about this pretty effectively throughout the entire process. So there's not like a separate court of lead agency that we're going to. I think that, and that's also probably something that we should actually amend, that it like doesn't go through, it's like not a separate and additional process in addition to your development review process, because this is kind of the way it reads to me. Yeah. So Kate, sorry, being the lone development community rep now, if you disagree with any of that, let us know, but I think it's probably both, Steve. Yeah. Sure.
I just think there is this basic conflict that the agreement was trying to resolve, which is if one of the agencies has the statutory authority in the code or in state law, the planning board can't overrule that. I mean,
right. And so we work out a condition of approval that MCDOT or whomever, sorry, Tim, you're closest to me. MCDOT or others, we craft these conditions together. We don't like to say, hey, here's the condition, you're going to live with it now. That's not the way we understand. We understand the jurisdictional authority on certain issues and within rights of way. And so we work together to make sure our conditions are acceptable to that lead agency.
And the applicant.
I would generally agree. There are letters, there are planning board resolutions that say we adopt DOT's letter except for comment 19. And sometimes that's minor stuff and sometimes it's important stuff. Yep. But that I think generally we're trying to get to a consensus.
Yep. Fred had a comment.
I just want to be clear. Is the intent to modify or revise this MOU? I just want to, so I know what the, so I know what to go back to when I go back to the, our main building and, reach out to our general counsel and everything, get everybody, situated, because that's the route that it would have to go for us. So
I think that the intent is to modify. I think the question is, at what point is that going to happen, right? It's probably not going to happen between now and October 1st, I'm assuming. Although one of the things that she's saying no. I think one of the things that would be helpful post this meeting if there are specific things that any of you want to make sure get considered as part of that revision, that you email that along to, and I'm not even sure who the right person is, so that kind of our planning group can be aware of that. Because I know we're not giving enough time for kind of everyone to weigh in, including people who are online. So, or if there are things that have already been said, but you want to reinforce it, send that our way, just again, so that we're making sure that we've got sufficient input to, at whatever juncture that process begins of revising it, that we've got the full scope of stuff. I guess one of the things, so we talked about laws changing, policies changing. Essentially, this document, as I read it, again as a novice, is it's a process document, right? It's about like who does what, who has the lead, who's supporting the lead. So I think at some level, there's only so much that document can do, right? I mean, there's other things that need to happen outside of it. Just and again, maybe it's just for my own clarification's sake, but in terms of what kinds of things need to be changed in this document and what's kind of beyond the purview of this document, I think is really important. Yeah. Which is also, I have to say, really hard to read as an outsider.
12th generation copy.
12th generation copy, long tables. So anyway, so let me see where we are on time, because I know we should be probably wrapping up here. We got about 15 minutes left. I guess, I guess a couple things that I would say here as we move towards wrap up. One is, I think it's really important between this meeting and the meeting on the 28th that planning, once you've had a chance to kind of go through the data that was presented today and the data as kind of as you need to look at it, of coordinating with some of the executive level agencies before we come back on the 28th. Because ultimately we all need to be working together, right? And I feel like today planning was kind of caught off a little off guard. And part of that was just kind of accelerated timeframes and et cetera, but in the spirit of what we're trying to do here, I really want to make sure that once you guys have had a chance to digest and kind of respond, that perhaps there's a follow-up conversation before the 28th, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, right? So that we're not coming in and still saying, well, that's not what, or that's not, so that we can kind of come in with singing more or less from a similar song sheet, all right? I guess a question I have about the conversation that we just had is, are there specific next steps that we need to take on lead agency? Is there a follow-on conversation that needs to happen, or have we heard enough? This is something that needs to be addressed, but that, and we need to compile more ideas about how it gets updated. But is there a follow-up conversation that needs to happen? Diane?
I have a motion. I have a motion to put up on the table.
We don't do motions.
Well, my thought on the lead agency MOU, because I think it's important. I think it's important for all of us to understand it and look at it, because just looking at it, I can see things that need to be updated. But could this be one of the takeaways, is that DPS, DOT, Park and Planning will each do their, as a takeaway post this work group item, will do their own version of what they think needs to be updated in it, and then work together to come to an updated MOU. That's not going to happen within this framework. This is not the right framework for it to happen, but I think that each agency looking at it from their holistically, the executive branch and Park and Planning, then coming together for an updated and having a time frame within which to complete that task. Just a thought.
Thoughts about this recommendation or this proposal?
Yeah, it should be one of the action items.
I think it's an action item. It should involve WSSC. It should involve SHA as well. So that creates a little bit more dynamic.
Agreed to that.
Well, also an obvious solution to the issue of the loading dock and the road is to change the lead agency requirements and say that we're, the roads will be impacted, that DOT also has a role on the site.
Absolutely. And compliance with law too.
Yeah.
You could also change the requirements so that if you have a loading dock, if it's 40 feet, that the loading dock extends into the building a little bit, so that way it's not, there's other ways to address that as, yes, I agree, and there's other ways to look, just maybe looking at things holistically.
Right, exactly.
And how does that work? Who's the creative, holistic person in that group that helps them to think outside of the statute?
I think it's a collaboration of park and planning and DPS and DOT to look at the zoning ordinance and.
And then who tells the developer that they're going to lose another 20 feet of their first floor space?
Well, the developers will whine, for sure. But it's part of, it's part and parcel with creating a safe community.
All right, so I'm hearing an action item where kind of each of the agencies here agree to that, yes, it needs to be updated, and perhaps can begin at least reviewing and figuring out where some of the updates might be, but realizing that the actual full updating process is going to happen post October 1st. Senator Kramer?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that. One of my takeaways from today, listening to this and this issue of transportation, park and planning, maybe part of the conversation should be, why are we not consolidating into a single agency some of these things? So I hope that will be part of what the broader discussion will become about out of this work group. And, certainly no reason for departments to be defensive about what they heard today. It's okay, here's some issues. Let's look at how we're going to best address those issues. So that's what I am hoping, that this isn't about a turf war, but that we're going to be focused on improvements and streamlining and how that happens. So thank you. Again, I appreciate all the discussion and the work that this group is doing. So thank you all very much for that.
Great. So just quickly, as we close here, so can anyone identify things that you believe need to be done between now and the 28th, just so that our smaller planning group is aware of what that might be?
Can we get a centralized workspace where documents can be housed so that we can actually access them? Because there was such a flurry of emails, and your PowerPoint today was really, really good. Your PowerPoint last week or 2 weeks ago was really, really good. And Park and Planning's PowerPoint, everybody's work that they're doing is really, really good, but it should all be in one location. A bullet, I don't know what even, a website, whatever it is, so that we can actually access it.
I think that's a really good point. That's something we could talk about on Friday.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Other thoughts?
I don't know. If it's possible to maybe have some actual development plans, like out of all the data that you guys pulled, the ones that took the longest or had stalls and Nate and Gary, like if you guys have things on the plan. Like, I really want to know about the Burger King. I mean, you have your dock. I'm just saying, like, projects that are really identifiable as having had issues that the group can look at, because every issue is going to be different. Every project's going to be different. But if we're looking for like efficiencies or whatever, maybe just kind of hearing some of those stories instead of kind of speculating.
One of the things we talked about internally was, I don't know if we want to call it a presentation, but some kind of joint collaborative looking, each kind of agency looking at the same project to identify where some of the pain points, et cetera, might be.
Case studies.
Yes.
Say it again.
Some case studies.
Yeah. Now, we don't want to get awash in case studies, because again, part of the thing that I'm always feeling is like, when do we get to the actual recommendations? But we still need to be clear on data and agreement on data and really kind of identifying pain points and delays so that we can hopefully accelerate into, so what are we actually recommending as a work group?
Yeah.
But if case examples I'm hearing from the community, which is really important here, may be important, perhaps we can do two collectively, and you all can figure out offline which ones those might be. Kate?
And I would just like to add, because each development project is so different.
Yeah.
If there are case studies that can be identified that are kind of representative of an issue that you see more than one time, I think that would be really helpful.
Representative is a really good word for
The
that.
new urbanism one,
A new urbanism,
you
okay.
know, with the new trying to fit in so many different things on a small site. I think that's a.
I also had a question as a takeaway item that was in a previous conversation. I think that Senator Kramer had asked for some comparable jurisdictions and what their structure of government is, I guess. And is there anything comparable to what Montgomery County's is? And I don't know if anybody has taken on that, but I do recall that he had specifically requested that.
Yeah, so I spoke with Delegate Lopez a week and a half ago, and she said she was going to ask the staff at DLS, Department of Legislative Services in the State House, to do that research over the next few weeks to see what's comparable. So, Robert.
Yeah, I was gonna, and in response to the previous comment about looking at consolidating agencies, my understanding of the work group was to look at how we improve the process, not at restructuring. And I thought that was agreed upon early on. So I just want to say, let's focus on that. The other thing is, I think collectively, we all have websites. We've developed one for this work group. I know that I'm assuming the other agencies are doing the same, and we can talk about how to share the information so that people are working on the same documents or looking at the same information. And we can do that and try and figure out what's the best approach on how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for my own perspective, having been in projects like this, a common site, like even if it's coming from different sources, I think a common site is the easiest for an individual work group member to access.
I was just going to say, yes, we agreed that we're not going to look at wholesale moving development review from the planning board to the executive. But we've also, but we have agreed to look at what we can do about duplication, so that if you've got you've got the two agencies and they've got employees doing the exact same thing, I think it could be worthwhile to look at what would happen if, you only had one environmental group or.
Right, yeah, so looking for areas for duplication.
Right.
Senator Kramer, you have your hand up?
Yep, thanks. I wanted to respond momentarily to what I just heard, and that is, my impression or my hope of this, and look, if it doesn't come out of this task force, that's fine. There are other opportunities to look at efficiencies and improvements in the process. My hope out of this work group was that there would be a sincere and honest effort at looking at, yes, if there is duplication, and I appreciate the comment I just heard on that, is that if there is duplication, then maybe it's appropriate to take a look at, okay, if there's duplicative services here, how can we maybe streamline that and improve the process? So I hope this isn't going, as I, have said, I hope this isn't, like a little bit of a turf war. And we're not worried about the outcomes for the residents and the taxpayers. We're more focused on maintaining our own little bit of power, authority, and turf. I would hope that's not what the outcome will be, and that at the end of the day, yes, where there are opportunities to determine there's an ability to make this process function more efficiently. Let's be bold and take a look at that. So with that, thank you.
Yeah, so I think there's a commitment all around in all the conversations I've been in of looking at getting rid of redundancies, streamlining, syncing up, figuring out what can happen in parallel. I don't think we're quite there in the process, but I think my sense is there's a commitment to that. Part of my job is to make sure that we continue to be looking at all those things so that by the end of September, we really have identified some important things that can help make the process more efficient, more streamlined, and for better outcomes for developers, for the community. So I think we're there. This is just it's a slog to some degree to kind of get there. Amanda, do you want to have the last word?
Well, no, not the last word, but we do have another public hearing next week, right?
We do.
So I just wanted to make a comment on that. So we've had basically a trickle of testimony and comments coming in. And I think that, and some of those comments have been pertinent to what this work group's purpose is, and some of them have been a little bit outside of it, but still, important nonetheless, and worth looking at separately. But I just think that speaks to sort of how complicated this is from the public perspective. I would really love to hear from some more folks in the development community about their ideas. And I've put this out to the Bethesda Implementation Advisory Committee that I'm on to try and encourage some of those folks to come. But just, I think the public they almost need a tangible proposal in front of them to be able to provide more meaningful comments on what we're doing in this particular work group, because it is a little bit abstract or complicated.
And I think that's a really important reminder. I'm not up to date on kind of how the communications and PR for people coming on the 18th has been going. I'm assuming that the word has continued to go out. But, I guess what I would say is if there's anything that each of us individually can do to ensure more people line up, whether virtually or in person, to give comment, that's really important. Because after next Tuesday, there's only one other option. Obviously, they can continue to do it through public comment, but there's only one more in-person, or it's a virtual meeting. There's only one more scheduled meeting for that. In terms of, I think we talked at the very beginning about having either specific questions we wanted people to try and answer if they cared to, or having something on the table for them to react to. I think one of the challenges that we continue to have is I'm not sure, beyond if they've looked at materials that have been circulated, if they've heard the presentations, they may have very specific things to react to, but I'm not sure what the thing or things might be that we'd want to have them react to at this point.
Okay. Well, Steve, if I may, what we did when we did the streamlining effort in the work in 2011, 2012 timeframe, and this was done collaboratively with Park and Planning and DPS, we actually had a charrette type of a setup where we had tables for, it was a less formal than a public hearing, where we had tables for the various touch points in the entitlement process. And there were experts, the tables were staffed, and there was a lot of outreach effort to get the development community to come in and then give suggestions, and probably similar to what Christina had done with the development community to some degree, but to come in and make suggestions about where they're seeing problems on the various touch points in the development process. And then we took from that and we worked from that and we made changes based on that feedback. There may not be time for that, but I think developers feel very threatened, I think, about making comments. At least I hear that they do. I wish they wouldn't, because it's all part of the process of improving. But it's a safer area where it's more like work sessions that they can come in and participate and share their thoughts on how to improve things. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thought. I mean, one of the challenges, at least as I understand the way this process was set up, was that there was a commitment to doing 3 kind of more traditional public hearings where you get your 2 or 3 minutes at the mic. So I'm not sure, I like the idea. I love going to those kinds of meetings. I'm not sure we can accommodate that. But what I would like to hear, again, I know we're at 1 o'clock. Are we going to 1 or 1:30? 1:30, okay. Well, we might end early then.
All the lunches are out there. I don't know.
I was thinking we started at 9, sorry. So what, I guess 2 questions on the table for me. One is, how do we ensure we get significant input on the 18th? Second question, is there any question or questions that we want to put to them? That they at least potentially respond to, or is it just kind of whatever your perspective is? Again, what we had at the first meeting was this 1-page chart, right? And to the point, I think that Diane, you may have just made, it's like at a high level, people can say, well, we really get bogged down in the between applicant community meeting and application formally accepted. So this could be used as a very high level guide for people trying to pinpoint where the pain or delay is. But again, let's answer the question. Is there anything we want to put on the table for people to react to, including just questions that we'd like to ask people at least consider responding to?
I'd say something like, what about the development review process do you dislike the most or hate? Talkative, and then what about the development process do you like?
As long as we say the same about permitting, because this is intended to kind of go through the whole gamut, so.
We just say development review.
I think you need to be specific about permitting, if that's the case.
Development review and permitting.
Development review and permitting.
So I think it would also be helpful to do this. I mean, we did do surveys. We did do surveys. We created an access database, if you would, so that people who did not want to be identified could come in and make suggestions. But I think you want to establish, are you familiar with the process? Are there things that you see in the development that you have in the development that's occurring in the county that you have issues with? If you've been through the process, what are the points at which, are there areas that we could do better? Are there areas where you found yourself pinched between different agencies? Did you run into roadblocks? Did you run into problems? Where were they? What are they? And then you have something to talk about. What do you not like? What do you, that I wouldn't want it to be that type of subjective. I'd like it to actually be, a little more focused.
Yeah, and if the development community does participate in the next hearing or the third, having it too broad is probably not going to be super helpful. Just where are the points in the process that you find most cumbersome? Where are the points in the process you find, in your opinion, could easily be streamlined or and more efficient? And I'm sure that alone would probably generate a pretty sizable list. I imagine you'd probably, Kate, you probably know your points of, this is really frustrating. This always happens. If we could only work on this and make it a little more efficient. Sorry to again put words in your mouth, but I imagine you have that list somewhere that you all talk about in your shop.
Right now, the only way a developer can participate is just through testifying, and we don't have the other avenues that Diana suggested, and so, there's an issue of it being very public.
Also add cost, because there's time, there's cost, and I mean, those are the things that you're, like, where do you see opportunity to streamline costs? I think you want to make it so you're engaging them and helping us to make it feel better, make it feel more welcoming without, like you're saying, ostracizing or making them come and complain about things. It's just like, let's all work together, type of attitude.
So
But a quick question here, because it was brought up, I think, in an earlier meeting, and again, it's showing up today. So if developers in particular are reluctant to comment or kind of be identified with a comment, is there something that we can do to enable them to, whether it's a survey that's anonymous, I don't know, but we certainly don't, we certainly want to hear from as much of the development community as possible. And if there is discomfort with identifying themselves, then we may not get everything we need, so.
I think a survey could be done. I mean, that's pretty easy to happen. One thing I did want to ask, I mean, is your idea that these questions would be in the next 6 days presented to the county? I mean, the county as a whole for people to react to, because it's, we did send out the notices for this next public meeting and the one in August. And just to give the public enough time to be able to react to some of these questions. Is that the intent? Is that these, because internally, we in the county executive's office and the council's office send a collective kind of public relations type promotion that gets blessed by the delegate. And so there is some time that has to get, that has to get factored into that. So I'm just asking.
It happens on Friday. It's when we've been doing it, I think, Thursday afternoon or Friday. But it's a joint effort. Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that the simplest way of doing this is it's like, it's a sentence or two in a press release or what have you that basically says, we would appreciate if people can kind of point to issues where it's cumbersome, where it needs to be streamlined based on experiences you've had. And perhaps something as simple as that. Colin first, then Diane.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to decide on who our audience is. I gather people more from the public at the last meeting.
Yes.
And how the public is in general versus how the development industry more specifically are going to look at these issues is different. The public, this is stratosphere stuff. Like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on over there. The development industry does, and we can get some, I think, credible feedback from them. But from the general public, what we want to know is what's not working. What didn't work when this development went through from your standpoint?
So, I think we could do all of this without changing at all the framework, Robert, that you mentioned. Why not? You've got the hearings, your schedules set up. Can we have a link to a survey on the site, and the agency, executive planning council come together on what's in that survey? Because I think that, and then the notices go out again about the hearing with the survey that is appended to it, or anybody could go there and do that instead. And the benefit of doing that, I think, is that it might also help to open people's minds up about things to testify about too, if they wish to testify. And I would also encourage us to, I think 2 minutes is, I think we might want to be a little more flexible on those 2 minutes when we're trying to get people to come out and talk about things. But anyway, the survey would be along with it, so that, and they're going in tandem instead of sequentially.
So, I think when we were initially planning for the first public hearings, the concern was, how many comments could we actually handle in a 2-hour public meeting? Obviously, that was not the issue at the first public hearing. If the numbers remain relatively small, I think we can probably give people at least another minute, from 2 minutes to 3 minutes.
Yeah, why don't you determine that based on the people that end up signing up?
Right.
So when you know how many have signed up, then you can establish how long
they could have the talk.
Yeah, and so they sign up, who do they sign up with? Do they sign up with?
You know, is it in the range of 2 minutes?
No, that,
5?
this hearing,
You get a half
well,
an hour.
both of us, yeah. It's
Yeah, I mean, I
both.
think
They
it
can
would
sign
be
up. But I
something that
haven't
we put up
received
on
anything.
a site that would be that we'd identify in the press release that, you know, you're gonna do jointly anyone. I don't know where the site would be set up.
Do we have any signups so far for we do? How many do we have?
I don't remember how many, but I know I keep, I know we have a
More than
handful.
last time?
More than last
More than last
time.
time.
But my bigger point was the survey link, folks. I just want to be clear. That was my bigger point rather than the 2 minutes. That was sort of an afterthought. The bigger point is have a thoughtful, information generating survey that is appended to the work that's going on here. So anybody who isn't comfortable testifying, or even if they are comfortable, can fill it out with substantive questions and substantive responses to substantive questions.
I guess my quick thought about surveys is the survey's got to be kind of really short and with kind of the basic questions that we're talking about here. We don't want to spend a lot of time. It's like 7 questions. It gets sign off from all the different it's like 2 or 3 questions. It's set up anonymously, can be put together really quickly, and the link could go out, if we're efficient enough by Friday. But we'll have to start working on it pretty immediately, I think.
Just suggest with the survey, because we're going to try and come up with some questions very quickly and get to agreement. That's going to be like a least common denominator.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is to maybe get an anonymous way for developers to explain some of the troubles that they may have had. So if there could be like a text box with a character limit or something to say, just an open.
That can be done.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Because we're going to come up, I could envision like a question, okay, we could list all the process, which part of the process have you experienced a problem with? And it goes from here to ribbon cutting. And, we'll get like my charts, we'll get a chart that says how many people have had problems with each step of the process. And hopefully they're not all just a straight line across the top, but.
Yeah, I think commentary, that's the important part of a survey.
Yeah, I think any survey question we're asking is qualitative, not quantitative. Yeah.
I just would like to make 2 points. One, the Maryland Building Industry Association did submit a letter to this committee.
Right.
So I would encourage everybody to read that letter because I think it symbolizes, or kind of not symbolizes, summarizes, respectively, the development community in the county and kind of the thoughts on the process and this particular work committee. The second thing is too, I think there's some confusion in the development community because we had the DRC retreat last year. There's been other opportunities over the last year or so to provide feedback on the development review process. So by calling this committee the Development Review Committee, from the developer standpoint, well, I've already provided feedback. I don't know necessarily if I need to provide more because we've already gone over this. You guys got my feedback. No, let me just move on. So I think we may need to let everybody know that it's not just development review. It is the holistic process from the time you submit a development review application to the time you actually get your first building permit so you can put a shovel in the ground to start work. And that is a big difference than the development review process. You still may not get a lot of feedback, but at the same time, you can try.
All right.
Is it possible to target market?
No, we need to put on the bottom.
Can you
No, we
just
really need it this time.
For example, the people who register to testify can very easily receive that link because you have their information, they have intention to attend. And then the audience that you're trying to grab, the developers, maybe just target the applications aren't that many, probably within the last 3 years, to just send them something directly to Kate's point, explaining again what it is, asking for this feedback, inviting them. But it's more of a targeted approach, but I think in trying to get samples and case studies and really talk to people who are doing it actively right now will give us what we're looking for.
So I think it's a good question. I don't know kind of how databases are set up and whether
We use constant contact. We use a number of different platforms to get the word out, as to the county executive's office and all the others. So I think we can collectively think about, are there some other target audiences that maybe we haven't reached out to that we should be?
I think, especially to the conversation we just had, it's like, at least for certain segments, articulating how this is a little different than what may have been done in the past that they've participated in. All right, any other items that we need to address between now and the 28th, or anything you want to make sure that we focus on the 28th?
So just to be clear, so for this survey, it's 3 questions with a text box, but obviously this group isn't going to meet before, if that's going to be posted on Friday. So are we just using these questions and then putting a text box?
I think some refined version of those questions, yes.
Okay.
And no more than 2 or 3 questions. Other thoughts about the work that needs to be done between now and 28th, or what needs to be on the table on the 28th? We've heard that we're some kind of joint presentation, discussion of projects commonly agreed upon between planning and county exec agencies.
But I think Kate has a very good point, and I did read the MBIA letter several times. But now that we've had more discussion, some of the things that the letter says, I think, are more meaningful, at least to me. And it says consolidation of review processes would best be promoted by improving functions between agencies. For example, improving intake review timelines, consolidating or limiting periods for agency comment, establishing an efficient process for resolving conflicting agency comments and directives, and clarifying overlapping roles and authority between departments. So a lot of that is lead agency stuff, but.
So are you reading from the letter of intent?
Yes, I'm reading from their letter.
The MBIA letter.
Oh, the MBIA letter, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so it's important everyone take a closer look at that.
Actually, we've received some correspondence, we have the public hearing, but I don't think we've as a work group actually looked at any of it, as a group.
Individually, yeah.
So maybe after the 28th, we at least I think it's true that some of it's not quite relevant to the work group, but at least actually go through the correspondence on the 28th, because by then we'll have had 2 of these hearings.
I think that's a great idea.
Can we put them into a tabular form, sort of, so that we can track them and track the conversation about it? So the commenter, the substance of the comment, and then the discussion?
And, yes. Well, that's a great idea, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges, some of the comments are relatively brief and some are pretty lengthy. So I don't know if there's an efficient way of putting things in tabular form. But we can take a closer look at what's the best way of kind of circulating it so we can have a good discussion about it.
So can I just finish up and say, Emily ordered some awesome food for people, and it's outside here. I'm sure everyone loves warm mayo on their sandwich now, but everything is out here for you to take. And kudos to Emily for putting this together.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to planning for hosting again. And a lot of food got left here last time, so let's make sure that doesn't happen again. Because Robert ended up having to, bring it home and distribute it to his neighborhood.
He's still
I was like, you had food in a government building that wasn't even.
All right.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thanks, Diane. Thanks all. Appreciate it. We'll stay connected with you in prep for next meeting. Take care.
Thank you.